Chapter 802. As a demon cultivator, Zhubogeo was most afraid of mysterious thunder arts. Seeing the descending lightning, he was extremely nervous, and naturally used his entire body to block it. At this moment, thousands of purple lightning bolts struck down from the sky, smashing into the golden beryllium formation with the force of the sky collapsing. 500 golden beryllium jumped in unison, and spiritual light flowed within them, dispelling the power of this lightning strike. Zhubogeo only felt the formation first shake, then violently shake for a while before it calmed down, and his heart relaxed. He secretly rejoiced. This purple heaven divine thunder is indeed powerful. Fortunately, I've prepared this formation for a long time, just to deal with this situation. Now, it seems that I don't have to fear him. However, just as he had this thought, he quickly realized that something was wrong. When the lightning struck again, the tremors it caused were far more powerful than the last time. After a few more strikes, the power was stronger than the last, and the formation was gradually unable to bear the burden. He could not help but panic. How can this be? Even if Zhang Yan's magic power is much deeper than it was during the sword competition, how can the power of his divine art be so great? It's completely different from what was written in the records. He did not know that the purple heaven divine thunder Zhang Yan used during the sword competition was actually not complete. Just now, this purple heaven divine thunder net was showing the true power of this divine art. Once this technique enveloped the enemy, if it could not destroy them in one strike, it would retreat and accumulate power. When it had enough power, it could be used again. As long as the user of the divine art still had magic power, it could be used continuously until the enemy was completely destroyed. Zhubogeo did not last long before he felt the circulation of his magic power become sluggish. In his senses, more than 10 golden beryllium spiritual chi had already been shaken and scattered. They turned into ordinary metal and fell to the ground. When they came into contact with the lightning net below, they immediately disappeared without a trace. He felt that something was wrong, and immediately thought of a way to save himself. As more and more golden beryllium was damaged, the entire formation was on the verge of collapse, as if it could collapse at any time. At this moment, there was no time to think too much. He took out a jade pot from his sleeve, looked at it, and sighed before tossing it away. The jade pot rode a wisp of clear light and arrived above his head. Then, from the spout of the pot, a satin-like brocade cloud quickly enveloped his entire body. Whenever the lightning struck, it was like a clay ox entering the sea, and there was no sound. The pot swayed back and forth and actually took the initiative to absorb the lightning energy. Not long after, the lightning in the surroundings was completely dissipated. Zhang Yan saw this strange scene in the sky. With a slight sigh, he raised his hand and attracted the lightning from other places to strike down. However, no matter how many lightning bolts struck down, the lightning bolts would not stop. It was easily resolved and the cloud wasn't damaged at all. He guessed that it might be a rare treasure. Thus, with a thought, he didn't waste any more spiritual energy. With a wave of his hand, he retracted the ability. On the other side, the two demon sect cultivators had their magical treasures destroyed by the lightning bolts. They were on their last breaths and were about to die on the spot. However, the sky full of lightning bolts suddenly dispersed. Although they didn't know the reason, they didn't dare to miss this chance to escape. They trembled as they took out their talismans and used their remaining spiritual energy to control the flying shuttle, trying to escape. However, after a few hundred miles, they couldn't hold on any longer and fell onto a mountain. This place was close to the Jin River, and there were two monster cultivators patrolling the river. Just now, when the ganging fell, the two of them dug a hole and avoided the disaster. Now that they saw the item, they looked at it from afar and didn't dare to approach it. One of them said, "Look at his aura, he seems to be from the demon sect. Quickly report to Elder He and see what he will do." The other immediately dove into the Jin River. Not long later, Elder He arrived with a group of people. He looked at the flying shuttle with a deep gaze and raised his hand, saying, "Bring it back. We'll deal with it after the battle." Above the extreme heaven, Zhubogeo saw that the purple light in the sky faded and the sky became clear again. He heaved a sigh of relief and looked at the jade pot again. However, he showed a look of pity and thought to himself, what a pity for this treasure. This pot was called the Spring Awakening Pot. Several generations ago, the ancestor of the Yuyuan tribe had made a great contribution to the ancestral court, so he bestowed this treasure as a reward. Inside the pot was a mouthful of heavenly demon essence chi from ancient times. If a monster cultivator cultivated the fifth transformation of strength path, they could use this to avoid the lightning tribulation. However, after the heavenly monster bloodline was severed, no one could cultivate this, so its use was greatly reduced. Just now that the formation was broken, he had no other way to deal with the purple cloud's divine thunder, so he could only use this item. However, once this treasure was used, it would be stained with impurities. Whether he used it or not, it would dissipate on its own after 49 days, so he was a little reluctant to use it. Zhang Yan could already tell that Zhu Bogeo was calm when he used the divine path technique. It was not something that could be done in 3 months, so he was clearly prepared to deal with him. However, after breaking the golden beryllium formation, he lost a place to hide. In addition, his opponent was not skilled in escape techniques, so the advantage he had before was gone. However, Zhu Bogeo did not see it that way. He thought that he had already tried all of Zhang Yan's methods and had nothing to fear. He raised his head and said, Zhenren Zhang, I know your divine path is powerful, but you may not be able to take me down this time. Why don't we call it a draw? I can swear that the million people of Yuyuan tribe will not step into Donghua continent within 100 years. He had already considered this proposal many times. Zhang Yan was the head of the top 10 disciples of Qinsong school. Even if he fought to a draw with him, it would still damage his reputation. The devil doctrine would definitely not care about him not entering Donghua continent, so he could retreat unscathed. Zhang Yan looked down and laughed lightly. Why do you say that, demon kings? Just now is just a test. Do you think that I have exhausted all of my methods? As soon as he finished speaking, he took a step forward. There was a rumble, and thousands of feet of water light rose behind him. Like a rising tide, it rose higher and higher. Not long after, it covered the sky and the earth, and then poured down with a rumble. As soon as this water element true light was released, it was like overturning the sea and overturning the ocean. Its momentum was not inferior. Just now purple heaven thundernet. Zhu Bogeo looked at the water that covered almost his entire field of vision and could not help but be shocked. He swung the golden silk of hidden waves in his hand, wanting to collect it like the heavy water from before. However, there was too much of the water light, and its momentum was getting higher and higher. He could not collect it in time. When the water light spread, it produced a suction force, as if it wanted to drag him in. He hurriedly used his Xian technique and stabilized his body in the raging tide. Then he swung his head and whipped the long beard over, wanting to force Zhang Yan to be unable to use this technique. Zhang Yan smiled. His body did not move. A leaf suddenly flew out from his aperture acupoint and hung above him. A curtain of golden light fell down and shielded him. The long beard whipped over, and there were several crackling sounds. It only shook the golden light, but did not break it. Zhu Bogeo did not give up. He raised his longbow and shot over 10 arrows in a row. However, the light of the arrows did not get very far before they were wrapped up by the tide halfway. They could not reach Zhang Yan at all. His expression was slightly flustered. Although he still had some techniques he had not used, he could not use them in the tide. Moreover, his attack did not hit, so there was no chance for him to turn the tables. I can only use a risky move now. After he made up his mind, he took out a long scarlet ribbon from his sleeve and wrapped it around his body. Then, he turned into a streak of rainbow light and flew away. He wanted to escape from this watery light first and then look for an opportunity to strike. Zhang Yan shook his shoulder and put away the water light that filled the sky. He formed a streak of light and chased after Zhu Bogeo. However, he did not get too close. Instead, he trailed far behind. He was not afraid that Zhu Bogeo would escape. The mana of a cultivator of the path of Qi was much longer than that of a cultivator of the path of strength. If he was not willing to stop, The one who would exhaust his mana first would definitely be the other. After flying for a while, Jubogeo's speed became slower and slower. It was as if he was not able to keep up. However, the distance between the two of them had shortened by a lot. When there was only a distance of 10,000 feet between them, Jubogeo shook his body. There was a flash of spiritual light in the streak of light, and he actually revealed his original form. He turned into a white carp that was 100 feet long. With a stroke of his pelvic fin, he leaped into the void. As if he had entered the river, he suddenly disappeared. In the next moment, this white carp suddenly appeared 1,000 feet above Zhang Yan's head. However, it instantly changed back into its human form. Then, it raised its two long beards, and rays of mysterious brilliance appeared. It actually froze the spiritual vigor in the surroundings, not allowing anyone to escape. Then, it picked up the divine weapon in its hand, and with a loud roar, it smashed down fiercely. However, right at this moment, there was a flash in front of his eyes. There were 100 sword lights flying towards him. Jubogeo snorted and operated his mysterious technique to the extreme. He was very clear that although this flying sword was powerful, it would most likely not be able to kill him. Therefore, he was prepared to take it head-on. As long as he managed to hit Zhang Yan once, he would be able to take his life. However, when the sword lights flew over, they did not attack him. Instead, they spun on the spot and encircled him in a brilliance. Zhang Yan glanced at it indifferently. His divine light sword formation was especially quick to activate. As long as he was within 1,000 feet of it, he would immediately be able to trap his opponent. However, he had not faced his opponent with this, after all. If the golden beryllium formation was still present, he might not be able to break through it. Now that his opponent had taken the initiative to charge over, it was the perfect time to activate it. Jubogeo felt his vision blur, and he was trapped in a dazzling and dancing sword formation. Sword lights flew back and forth, slicing towards his body. He instantly knew that he had fallen into a trap. At this moment, it was already too late for regrets. He hurriedly circulated all the transcendence energy in his body, causing the divine weapon and the two beards by his lips to dance, blocking the sword lights that were like rain outside. Zhang Yan wanted to test out the true power of this formation. After observing it for a moment, he stretched out a finger and extracted the formation chi, combining it into a beam of sword chi. He then activated his transcendence energy, and a soft hum was heard. Then, a beam of rainbow light flew up. The long beards of the divine weapon were actually unable to block this formless sword chi in the slightest. It passed through them, and with a thump, a head had already fallen off. However, although Jubogeo's head had fallen off, his body did not collapse. After a breath's time, a gust of black smoke sprayed out from his neck. It was released and retracted, and when it dissipated, his head grew out again. Zhang Yan sneered and said, "I'd like to see how many times you can regrow." He performed a hand seal, and another beam of sword light slashed out. However, as soon as the head was chopped off, it grew out again in the blink of an eye. This continued for dozens of times, and Jubogeo's transcendence energy was almost exhausted. He finally could not take it anymore, and begged for mercy, "Master, please don't attack again. This lowly demon is willing to surrender." Zhang Yan was unmoved, and continued to activate the sword light. After another dozen or so times, after Jubogeo's head had been chopped off, there was no more black smoke. Instead, a beam of bloody light burst forth, and after a while, the divine weapon in his hand loosened, and the headless body fell forward, falling from the clouds. Chapter 803. After the headless body fell, it seemed to be because of the Taoist robe it only fell a few dozen feet before it stopped and floated in the air. Zhang Yan's gaze flickered slightly. He raised his hand lightly and raised the sword light in the formation to grind it, turning it into a lump of rotten meat. However, after doing this, he did not remove the sword formation, but swept his gaze downwards. There were still dozens of heads there, but they were all abnormally sturdy. Although they were chopped back and forth by the sword formation chi, there was the sound of metal clashing, and they were not damaged in the slightest. After looking for a while, he said with surprise, the magical abilities of the demon kings are also extraordinary, but since they are trapped in Ai's sword formation, they can forget about escaping. Just as he spoke, one of the heads suddenly shook, and a large cloud of black smoke sprayed out from the stump. In just a moment, it dissipated, and the body actually grew back. Zhu Bogeo stared at Zhang Yan and said, I don't think I exposed any flaws, so how did you see through it? Just like when a Chi Path cultivator cultivated to the 3rd level of nascent soul, they would be able to seal the heavens and earth. When a Strength Path cultivator cultivated to the 4th level of nascent soul, they would also be able to obtain a divine ability. Due to the different inheritances of each cultivation method, the results of each cultivation method were different as well. And what he had comprehended was called the Yang in One Breath technique. If he was defeated in battle, even if only a portion of his body remained, as long as his primordial spirit did not dissipate, he could regrow it within an hour. In order to deceive Zhang Yan, he had even used a treasure of the devil sect to pretend that his primordial spirit had dissipated, thinking that after Zhang Yan removed the sword formation, he would be able to escape and then turn around. However, he did not expect to be seen through on the spot. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, the pair of jade whiskers of the demon kings are soaked in essence blood, so every time their heads are chopped off, they lose their luster. But one of the heads can protect the spiritual vigor of the 2 whiskers. This is too obvious. Zhu Bogeo was silent for a long time, then sighed and said, this battle is won by Jinren. I bow my head and admit defeat. He prostrated himself on the ground, kowtowed and said, only when I am about to die, I would like to ask for a favor from your esteemed sect. Please be magnanimous and let my tribe go. Zhang Yan pondered for a moment, then said in a deep voice, if Yuan's troops abide by our agreement and sincerely pledge allegiance, I won't bicker with them. However, I have a few questions to ask the Demon King. I hope you can answer me truthfully. When Zhu Bogeo heard that there was hope to preserve the lives of his clansmen, he hurriedly said, just ask away, master. Zhang Yan's eyes turned cold as he said, may I ask, Monster Kings, did you get help from the devil sect when you gathered millions of people at the mountain boundary of the 2 continents? Zhu Bogeo admitted, it is indeed so. More than 100 years ago, a few people from the devil sect came looking for me. They wanted me to lead my troops to Donghua after the Devil's Cave appeared. To tell you the truth, I still have a son in the Blood Soul sect. His name is Xiao Dao, but he is actually a hostage. He knew that he couldn't hide this matter. It wasn't as if Qinsong School didn't have the ability to search one's soul. They could capture his primordial spirit and bring it back for questioning. Instead of being tortured, he might as well tell the truth. Moreover, for the lives of his troops, he had no choice but to do so. Zhang Yan came down and asked a few more questions. This person answered them truthfully. When he had nothing else to ask, he formed a hand seal and prepared to activate the sword formation. To end it all. However, Zhu Bogeo stretched out his hand and said, wait, there's no need to trouble Master Zhang. He placed his hands on the 2 jade whiskers by his lips and pulled them down with a chuckle. He knelt on the ground and presented them with both hands, saying, I have already infused the essence blood I refined over the past 800 years into it. I believe that ordinary treasures can't block it, so it can be considered somewhat useful. Today, I will gift it to you, Master. I only hope that you won't forget your previous promise. Zhang Yan thought for a moment, then raised his hand and grabbed the long whiskers. Without looking at them, he put them into his sleeve. He nodded and said, I will accept it. Demon Kings, go in peace. After removing the 2 whiskers, Zhu Bogeo's expression immediately became weary and haggard. He sat down cross-legged and took out a sharp awl from his bag. After looking at it for a moment, he suddenly raised his hand and stabbed it into the fontanelle. His body suddenly trembled, and the light in his eyes faded. His head drooped down to his chest, and then a wisp of his primordial spirit floated out. Zhang Yan waved his sleeve, and countless sword lights flashed by, crushing it in an instant. In the past, this primordial spirit would have been released for reincarnation, but Zhu Bogeo had fought him head-on and had seen his means. If he were to escape, it was inevitable that the demonic cultivators would learn of the details of the battle, so he had to be completely annihilated. With a gentle wave of his hand, he took the sleeve that the person had left behind. After flipping through it, he found the Yuyuan tribe's Fei King royal seal. He nodded subconsciously, and without looking at the other items in the bag, he put them away. He then dispelled the sword formation and leaped lightly. A beam of light tore through the astral clouds and descended. Not long after, he arrived in front of Shosue Mountain. When the Qinsong disciples below saw him, they were all delighted and shouted, "Perfected One is back! Perfected One is back!" With a turn of the beam of light, he landed on the altar. Zhang Yan retracted the light around him and walked out. Wei Zihong came forward and bowed, saying, "Master." Zhang Yan said, "Zhubo Gao has been killed by me, and now there is nothing left of him. Zihong, send a disciple to the Yuyuan tribe and order them to follow the terms of the dual letter and surrender within 3 days. If they don't, I will use my divine powers and flatten their millions of people." Han Wonka came forward and cupped his hands, saying, "Junior apprentice brother, I have not done much since I came here. Why don't you leave this matter to me?" Zhang Yan looked over and nodded with a smile, saying, "Since senior apprentice brother Han has requested, I will have to trouble senior apprentice brother to make a trip." He raised his sleeve and took out the royal seal, handing it over to Han Wonka, saying, "Senior apprentice brother, please take this." Han Wonka carefully put it away, bowed again, and flew towards the Jin River. Not long later, he arrived at the riverside. He said to Fang Zihong, "I am the envoy of the Qinsong. Zhubo Gao is dead. Quickly call the person who can make the decision to speak." His voice traveled far away. After a while, the water in the river surged. A young demon dressed as a scholar floated up while trembling, bowing repeatedly, "Venerable, please wait for a moment. Someone has already gone to report." Then he called out to the people behind him, and a fish demon that was about 10 feet tall carried a cloud couch over. Behind him were 2 beautiful female servants. The scholar nodded and bowed. "Shinran, please take a seat." Han Wonka said plainly, "No need." The scholar was startled. He turned around and scolded the beautiful servant. "Did you not hear Venerable's words? Quickly scram." The 2 beautiful servants and the fish demon heard this and hurriedly retreated into the river. About an hour later, the river suddenly parted. Like a fountain, traces of demonic qi leaked out. Next, Yuyuan tribe's horned tense boat floated up from the water. There were over 100 demons standing at the bow of the boat. Over 10 of them were rank 4 strength path cultivators. All of them were tall and muscular, wearing helmets and armor, holding divine weapons in their hands. They looked arrogant and valiant. The leader was a thin old man. He wore embroidered robes and a crown on his head. His gaze met Han Wonka's. He jumped up and cupped his fists, saying, "Venerable, I have kept you waiting. I am He Bai. May I ask for Venerable's name?" Han Wonka's gaze moved down, seeing the carp dragon belt around this old man's waist. There were over 10 jade fish of different sizes hanging on it. He was slightly surprised. He knew the rules of the demon tribe. Only those who had the loyalty of at least 10 tribes could have a jade fish, but this person had so many. His status in Yuyuan tribe was not much lower than Zhubo Gao. He returned the greeting, saying, "I am Han Wonka of Qinsong School I." Old he asked again, "Venerable said that the demon kings are already dead. Do you have proof?" Han Wonka pulled open his sleeves, taking out that seal, holding it in his palm. He spread it out in front of everyone, saying, "Everyone should be able to recognize this item." When the people on the boat saw the seal, their expressions changed. Some of them unconsciously exclaimed in shock. Only Old He's expression did not change. He was still calm. He sighed and said, "Since His Majesty is gone, then the matters of the tribe today, I can reluctantly make the decision. I can reluctantly make the decision. If Reverend has any orders, you can tell me." Han Wonka heard his words. He sized him up. His expression became slightly warmer. He then told the reason for his visit. Old He pondered for a moment, then made an inviting gesture, saying, "This is not a good place to talk, Venerable. Please enter the boat for a chat." Han Wonka immediately agreed, following him onto the boat, into an open room. Old He invited him to take a seat, ordered someone to serve tea, then instructed the attendants beside him to leave. He then raised his hand, activating the restriction. He asked in a low voice, "May I ask, Venerable, where is Zhu Bogeo's corpse?" Han Wonka said, "It has already been turned to dust." Old He seemed to be relieved. He said, "I have long wanted to join the High Sect, but Zhu Bogeo's magic power is strong, and he secretly colluded with the demon sect. This old man and the other tribe elders also have the heart but not the power. We did not mean to make things difficult for the High Sect." Han Wonka made an "oh" sound. He turned his body slightly, looked at him and said, "Forgive me for offending you, Taoist He. As a demon cultivator, why would you have such thoughts?" Daoran said, "To be honest, when the previous sect master led the 12 Grotto Heavens to attack my North Underworld, this old man's ancestor was conferred a title by your sect. Because of this the clan was able to prosper. Although the title was lost later on, every day I don't think about how I can serve the High Sect." Han Wonka said in surprise, "So old He and my Chinsong school have such a relationship, no wonder, no wonder." He looked surprised, but in his heart he did not take it seriously. When the Chinsong school attacked the North Underworld, there were many demon cultivators who were conferred titles. But hundreds of years ago, during the internal strife in the school, most of them tore up the title. If they did not establish their own sect, then they went to join the 8 divisions. But now that he had a use for this person, there was no need to say it. Old He said again, "Although Zhu Bogeo is dead, but his relatives and generals may not be willing to admit defeat. In at most 2 days, this old man will clean them up, then lead the troops ashore, and submit to the High Sect." Han Wonka nodded and said, "That's good." The two of them spoke a little more, and Han Wonka wanted to go back to report, but at this time, Old He stopped him, saying, "Zhenren Han, wait, this old man has a big gift to give to Zhenren Zhang." With a wave of his hand, he removed the surrounding restrictions, then sent out a spell. After a while, he saw a tall fish demon walk in, hugging a person tightly under each armpit. A strange look appeared in Han Wonka's eyes, and he immediately stood up to take a look, saying in a low voice, "Devil Sect cultivators?" Old He also stood up, saying, "These two were found at the riverbank, and they were already heavily injured at that time." This old man deduces that when Zhenren Zhang and Zhu Bogeo were fighting, these two wanted to peek, and were accidentally affected by the divine arts, which is why they are like this. Han Wonka laughed, turned around and said, "Good job, Taoist He. I will take these two away now, and when I return, I will naturally ask junior brother Zhang for your merit." Chapter 804. On the altar of the Shounen Mountain, Zhang Yan raised his sleeve and pointed with his finger. 2 long ribbons, one scarlet and one gold, floated in front of him and floated in the air, emitting strands of bright light that illuminated the entire mountain peak. In just half a day he had erased the original blood imprint on these 2 talismans and refined them again. However, he knew that these 2 talismans were not very useful to him. If his disciples performed meritorious deeds in the future, he could bestow them to them. He then took out the 2 long whiskers and carefully sized them up. The object was as white as jade, and there was not a single flaw on it. Moreover, there were specks of light lingering on it. With a slight shake, it was like floating dust, flickering dazzlingly. After thinking for a while, he decided to keep them by his side. This item was Zhu Bogeo's blood, sweat, and tears. He had refined it for more than 800 years. If not for the heaven and earth leaf, a high-grade profound weapon, he could not guarantee that it would not be cracked by the whip. It could also shake spiritual vigor within 1,000 feet, making it impossible for one to escape with escape techniques. If it was used in conjunction with a sword formation against an enemy, it might have a miraculous effect. It was a pity that without Zhu Bogeo, the master, this pair of jade whiskers stopped here. No matter how he refined them, they could not be upgraded. Suddenly, there were many noises from the foot of the mountain. Jingyu went to take a look and came over, saying, "Master, Zhenren Han has returned." Zhang Yan shook his sleeve and kept all the items in front of him into a pouch. He said, "Invite him in." Not long after, Han Wonka arrived at the altar. He first came up to greet him, then sat down and said, "I did not disappoint junior apprentice brother. An elder of Yuyuan tribe with the surname he has agreed to lead his tribe to surrender in 3 days." Zhang Yin asked, "How is this person's prestige in Yuyuan tribe?" Han Wonka thought for a while and said, "Even if he is not as good as Zhu Bogeo, he is not far from it. Junior apprentice brother, you might as well find a reason to get rid of him. That way, you will have no worries." Zhang Yin smiled faintly, but did not comment. Han Wonka took out a human pouch from his sleeve and threw it on the ground. He pointed at it and said, "There are 2 devil cultivators inside. He was captured by this elder he. I will hand him over to junior brother to deal with." Zhang Yin looked over and gently flicked his finger. A spiritual opportunity flew over and unfastened their mouths, revealing their faces. He couldn't help but smile and said, "It really is these 2 people." Han Wonka was surprised. "Does Shidi know these 2 people?" Zhang Yin nodded and said, "I've dealt with them a few times. If I'm not wrong, these 2 should be spies of the Devil's Doctrine." Han Wonka's eyes lit up as he said, "Then we must properly interrogate him and not let him off easily. Who knows, we might be able to get some useful information out of him." Zhang Yin pondered for a moment. Only then did he say, "These 2 people must have been captured by Senior Marshal Brother Han. This matter should be handed over to Senior Marshal Brother Han." Han Wonka changed his mind and stood up. With a serious expression, he said, "People of this level should have divine arts on them to prevent them from leaking secrets. I dare not boast and can only do my best." Zhang Yin smiled and said, "Even if I can't get anything out of them, it's fine. Senior Marshal Brother, just go ahead and do what you need to." Han Wonka agreed and struck out a spell to keep the 2 people back into the pouch. He then bowed and left with the pouch. 3 days later, the Jin River was surging with huge waves towards the shore. However, when it was 100 miles away from Shosue, it was like a galloping horse that had its reins reined in. Only the sound of the surging waves could be heard. Wei Zihong saw this at the top of the mountain and immediately flew up into the sky. He looked down and knew that Yuyuan's tribe had surrendered. However, he was not careless. The North Sea's demonic cultivators were fickle and he had to be wary of their tricks. After a while, he saw the large boat that he saw 3 days ago rise from the river. Behind it, hundreds of thousands of demons appeared one after another. Demonic aura surged and filled the sky. The old man at the head of the boat said a few words to the people behind him. He then left the people behind and drove the boat forward with the waves. Peng Yuzhou looked at the demonic cultivators and laughed coldly. "If it was up to me, we should kill all of these demons. Otherwise, there will be trouble sooner or later." Kai Rongju was standing at the side. When he heard this, he shook his head and said, "There are millions of demons in the North Sea. How can you kill them all?" Peng Yuzhou said coldly, "If we get rid of these in front of us, we will have peace for a long time. As for the future, if they dare to come again, we will just kill them. Didn't the ancestors set up this place to use this generation to train our disciples? What is there to be afraid of?" Kai Rongju waved his hand and said, "The enemies of our Xian sect are the 6 demon sects and not this generation. Using kindness and might is the best strategy." When Peng Yuzhou heard this, he could not help but laugh coldly. At this moment, on the large boat that was sailing over, Elder He, dressed in a brocade robe, stood at the head of the boat. A step behind him was a young cultivator. This person was tall and strong. It was obvious that his cultivation in strength path was not good, but his expression looked a little uneasy. He took half a step forward and said, "Ah Wang, with the power of my tribe and those uncles, it is not difficult to kill the remnants of the Zhu family. Why leave them alive? If we go to Xizhenrenzhang like this, won't Qinsong School look down on us?" Elder He sighed and said, "If I really manage to straighten out the inside and outside, and command the millions of people to respond, won't I be another Zhu Bogeo? How can Qinsong School be at ease with me?" The young cultivator nodded, not really understanding. Elder He said, "When you see the Zhenren of Qinsong School later, be more respectful. Don't put on the airs of the tribe." The young cultivator said, "Don't worry, Ah Wang. I am not an insignificant person." After a pause, he looked up and said, "It is just that I have something that has been stuck in my heart for a long time. I hope Ah Wang can clear up my doubts." Elder He took a few glances behind him and said, "Speak." The young cultivator said in a low voice, "Now that my Yuyuan tribe has pledged allegiance to Qinsong, what if the 8 demon tribes pass down an order in the name of the ancestral court to tear up the Qinsong school's imperial seal when the mystic demons are fighting? Will we obey?" Elder He shook his head and said, "We cannot count on the 8 tribes. They will definitely not offend Qinsong school for us." The young cultivator was surprised and said, "How can Ah Weng be so sure?" Elder He looked to the north, stroked his beard and said, "There are some things that I might as well tell you." When Qinsong school headed north, Zhubo Gao had sent people to the 8 tribes to ask for help. At that time, the ancestral court also responded and sent envoys to Qinsong. However, when they arrived at the great pool of Dragon Lake, they saw the northern dark heavenly sword hanging in the sky. Mystic light filled the sky, and the envoys immediately turned back. After that, they did not ask about it again. The young cultivator took a deep breath and said, "Ah Weng, I understand." At this moment, a beam of light flew over from the sky. It stopped in front of the ship. Wei Zihong appeared and said to the people below, "Come, report your name." Elder He stood up and bowed to the sky, saying, "I am He Bai, an elder of Yuan tribe. I have made an agreement with Zhenren Han to come here and pledge allegiance to the High Sect. Now, I wish to meet Zhenren Zhang. I hope you can pass on the message." Wei Zihong said, "Wait here." He raised his hand and sent out a talisman. After a dozen breaths, a beam of spiritual light flew down from the peak of Shosue Mountain. After taking a look, he said, "Follow me." Only then did Elder He know that the person in front of him was Zhang Yan's disciple. He hurriedly bowed again and said, "Thank you, Zhenren." He did not dare to go forward on the ship, so he got off the ship with the people behind him and followed Wei Zihong forward with the help of the strong wind. In less than a moment, they arrived at the foot of the mountain. Wei Zihong turned back and said, "Elder He, Master only wants to see you. Leave the people who come with you here." Elder He hurriedly said, "That should be the case." Although he had come here with most of the kings of his tribe as promised, he was a little uneasy in his heart. He was afraid that the Black Tsong sect would lie to him and then capture all the people who came to join them in one fell swoop. In this way, he could easily exterminate the millions of troops. But they were already here. He did not have time to think too much. He tidied up his robes and did not dare to fly. Instead, he obediently walked up the spell altar step by step. A moment later, when he arrived at the peak, he saw a young Taoist with eyes as bright as stars sitting on the spell altar. A boy carrying a rui was standing beside him. He hurriedly took a few steps forward and bowed. Yuan tribes He Bai pays respect to Zhenren Zhang. Zhang Yan's gaze was clear. Elder He lowered his head and did not dare to look him in the eye. Just as he was feeling uneasy, a voice resounded in his ears. "Elder He, within 100 years, the demonic cave will appear. Is your Yuan tribe willing to work for my Qinsong school?" Elder He shuddered. He also knew that East Hua Continent's demonic cave would appear soon. There would definitely be a battle between the mystical demons, and neither side would take a step back. Although Yuan tribe's strength path cultivators were not few in number, once they entered the battle, not many of them would be able to come back alive. But there was no way for him to refuse, so he could only bite the bullet and agree. He pretended to be indignant and said, "For thousands of years, the cultivators of the Devil sect have often entered the northern underworld to kill our people in order to cultivate their supernatural powers. My tribe has also suffered greatly. If the upper sect fights with the Devil sect, my tribe will definitely contribute." Zhang Yan nodded. "That's good." Elder He took out a large jade plate from his sleeve and presented it with both hands. "This is the token of the tribe's seal to show our sincerity." Zhang Yan signaled Jing Yu to take it. He then asked, "Elder He, are all the tribe leaders here?" Daoren replied, "There are more than 600 tribes in Yuan tribe. Today, there are only about 400 who came with me. The rest are still in the Jin River. They only brought the token that they entrusted to me. They said that they will only come to pay their respects if Master bestows them with a title." Zhang Yan's expression did not change. "Elder He, how do you think we should deal with these people?" Elder He lowered his body again. Master has already ordered them to come out and surrender. But they did not obey the order. I think they should be executed. Zhang Yan smiled indifferently. If that's the case, how about we let Elder He decide? Elder He gritted his teeth. I am willing to help the upper sect. Zhang Yan smiled. After this, Elder He can choose 2 nephews to come to my place. I will choose a good teacher and teach them the best chi path techniques. When Elder He heard this, he was stunned at first, then a wave of ecstasy welled up in his heart, and he could no longer maintain his composure. With a thud, he knelt down and kowtowed repeatedly, swearing, Zhenren's great kindness, this lowly demon is unable to repay it. If I have any disloyal thoughts in the future, I will definitely die from being struck by lightning. Zhang Yan smiled. Elder He, go back. I hope you will remember what you said today. Elder He stood up and bowed deeply. He excused himself from the altar. When he returned to the foot of the mountain, the young cultivator came up to him. Boing, how is it? Elder He's face revealed a trace of ruthlessness as he said, Gather the men and follow me back. Kill all the tribe leaders who are not here today. Chapter 805. The He clan was one of the major surnames of the ancient Shui clan. Their authority in Yuyuan tribe was only slightly lower than that of the Zhu clan. Now that Zhu Bogeo was dead, the Zhu clan was like a group of dragons without a leader. More than half of the clans that had submitted to them now sided with the He clan. With the help of this group of people, Elder He returned and used less than half a day to eliminate all the clans and demon clans that refused to submit. He also killed all of their subordinates. Because no less than 100,000 people were slaughtered, the water of the Jin River turned red in a single night. After this was done, he personally picked out tens of thousands of people in the clan and found 2 descendants of the direct bloodline with excellent aptitude. He summoned them to him and gave them a solemn briefing before ordering his grandson, He Jun, to send them to the Shosue mountain. When he returned to the Jin River, Elder He immediately found him and asked with concern, Grandson, did you see Zhenren Zhang on this trip? He Jun answered truthfully, I only saw Zhenren Wei. But don't worry, Weng, Zhenren Wei has already accepted these 2 nephews as disciples. Elder He was overjoyed when he heard this. He thought to himself, I thought they were most likely apprenticed to some unknown elder in Qinsong school. I didn't expect them to be Zhenren Wei's disciple. Zhenren Wei is Zhenren Zhang's 6th disciple. In the future, my 2 great-grandsons can also be considered disciples of Zhao Yu. He was happy for a while and calmed himself down. He asked again, did Zhenren Wei have any instructions? He Jun nodded. When I came out, Zhenren Han did say something. He said that one can also choose a few of the direct bloodline descendants of the Yuan tribe and send them over. He will teach them the Xianmen Orthodox method. At this point, he felt slightly excited. Weng Qinsong School is supporting us. In the future, we won't have to listen to the 8 divisions. Elder He pondered for a moment and said, we must obey the orders of the sect. Go and summon the uncles. He Jun acknowledged and immediately went out to summon them. Looking at his excited look, Elder He shook his head. In all fairness, he didn't want to see the other elders and juniors learn that chi path technique, but this wasn't up to him. Plus, this was the first task that Qinsong School gave him. If he refused to do it, or if he pretended to agree, then the outcome would definitely not be good. If Qinsong School could support him, it could also support others. One wrong step. But he would have to pay with his life. But he would have to pay with his family's life. About half an hour later, the 6 clan elders came to the cave together. At the very front was an old Taoist priest with bulging cheeks and protruding eyes. He wore a half-scale purple smoky robe and a fishtail crown on his head. His body was especially majestic and he was more than a foot taller than the others. This person stepped into the room and of the elders. An Qinghu of clan. He clan of the clan member of the clan of the clan of sect in of clan of. Elder he of clan in of clan of he of clan of the clan members of the clan members of the clan of clan. Elder Miao shouted, I don't understand, why must we be sent to learn that chi path cultivation method? It's fine if we are from a side branch, but we have to be sent there. Even if Qinsong School teaches techniques, it can't be the true technique that leads to the great Tao. It's definitely not a grotto heaven. Since that's the case, why waste the effort? Why don't we just send a few disciples with ordinary aptitude? What do you think, brother He? His words attracted a wave of agreement. Elder He stroked his beard and thought for a moment before saying, I understand everyone's intention. Please sit down and talk. Elder Miao exchanged glances with the people behind him, then took a seat at the banquet table. After he sat down, he said in an unrestrained manner, Elder He, we are demon cultivators. Even if our descendants join Leicong sect, they won't treat us as their own family. Wouldn't it be a waste of time to send those talented juniors over? Qinsong School only wants a hostage. It doesn't matter if they are slightly better. As long as you don't say anything, the elders and I will remember your friendship. Elder He looked over and saw the rest of the elders nodding their heads. He sneered in his heart, a bunch of short-sighted people. Jinrenzhang is the first seat of the top 10 disciples of Qinsong School. 100 years later, he will definitely become an elder in Hall of Dujin. He will become a grotto heaven sooner or later. To be able to be under Zhao Yu's tutelage is an opportunity that can't be obtained even if one begs for it. How dare you push it away? Moreover, if we don't use the descendants of the direct bloodline as hostages, who will care about it? We can't let them do as they please. If I make a mistake, Qinsong School will punish me. He thought for a moment before saying, everyone, Qinsong School is not a place that can be easily bullied. Forgive me for not agreeing to this. Elder Mian furrowed his brows and said unhappily, as long as it is done discreetly, how can Qinsong School know about the matters of our tribe? Elder He, you are being too careful. Elder He ignored him and said to the others, everyone, are your descendants being bullied in Qinsong School? I think there is no need to worry about this. Not to mention others, Jinren Zhang's 7th disciple, Han Zwicheng, is half human and half demon. I even heard that 100 years ago, there were 2 demon kings in the Eastern Sea who used the cave abode of Zhao Yu Heavenly Lake to cultivate. It can be seen that Jinren Zhang does not view demon cultivation as a different species. Moreover, if my descendants and nephews are under Zhao Yu's tutelage, our tribe will definitely be protected. In the future, we don't have to care about the edicts of the 8 divisions and we don't have to pay tribute anymore. One of the elders could not help but say, could it be that Qinsong School doesn't want us to pay tribute? Elder He smiled and said, if my descendants and nephews are under his tutelage, we will naturally be one family. Why would we need to pay tribute? Hearing this, the few people present could not help but be moved. They would not think about the future, nor did they have the mood to think about it. But not having to pay tribute was a real benefit that was right in front of them. Someone immediately said, if that is the case, I will send my descendants to Shosue Mountain tomorrow. Elder Mian was still unwilling and scoffed. Just as he was about to speak, a servant came in and said, Master, Jinren Wei is here. Elder He was shocked and stood up abruptly. He stretched out his hand and said, invite him in. He looked around and said, elders, this Jinren Wei is Jinren Zhang's 6th disciple. He was the one who led the troops to attack Gushan Mountain. When he arrives later, please be more respectful. Elder Mian was still sitting steadily at first, but when he heard that the person who came was Zhang Yan's disciple, he instantly felt uneasy and stood up unconsciously. He forced a smile and said, since he is Jinren Zhang's disciple, we must be polite. Why don't we go out and welcome him? Elder He smiled and said, Elder Miao is right. He immediately waved his sleeve. He shook his sleeves and walked out, and Elder Mian and the others followed. Everyone surged to the entrance of the cave abode, and not long after, they saw a valiant Taoist with a vertical scar in the middle of his brows. Elder He bowed respectfully and said, Wei Jinren, Hebai greets you. Wei Zihong returned the greeting, then looked over and said, I asked your grandson to pass on the message. Did Elder He receive it? Daoren said, I dare not hide it from Jinren. Just now, we are discussing this matter. Wei Zihong said, how is the discussion going? Before Elder He could speak, Elder Mian beat him to it, Since the upper sect has spoken, how would Yuan tribe dare to disobey? It's just that this old man would like to boldly ask one thing, those descendants of the direct bloodline. May I know who his master is? Wei Zihong smiled and said, if there are no accidents, then they are my disciples. Naturally, if you think it is inappropriate, then don't force it. I will report to my master and choose another good master for you juniors. Zhang Yan had already thought about it. If he taught the Qinsong school techniques, there would be many inappropriate aspects, but the Jade Yin technique was different. Wei Zihong was the head of the sect and could make the decision. Moreover, this technique was originally created by Tai Heng Patriarch, and this patriarch's true form was a demon flood dragon. In terms of the technique, it was quite compatible with these demonic cultivators. Elder Mian hurriedly said, No, to be taught by Jinren Wei is a great opportunity for us juniors. How would we dare to have any improper thoughts? Wei Zihong nodded and said, Then it is decided. Can you send the person here tomorrow? Elder He smiled and said, Why tomorrow? Zhenren can bring the person here today. He glanced at his seat and said, Don't you all agree? Elder Mian cupped his hands and said, I will bring my grandson here now. When he finished, he bowed and left with the other elders. After they left, Elder He wanted to invite Wei Zihong into the cave but was rejected by him. He took out a letter from his sleeve and said, Today, I have a decree from my master to pass to you. Take it and read it. Elder He's expression turned cold as he received the letter solemnly. He then dismissed the people around him and opened it. After a short while, he carefully kept the letter in his sleeve and solemnly cupped his hands and said, Since it is Zhenren Zhang's decree, I will definitely do it. There will be no mistakes. Wei Zihong said, This is a serious matter. If there are any discoveries, you must write to me immediately. My master will not be stingy with your rewards. When Elder He heard this, he hurriedly expressed his loyalty. After 2 hours, Elder Mian and the rest hurried over. The descendants of each family were also brought over. There were a total of 17 people. Wei Zihong did not say much to them. With a wave of his sleeve, a strong wind swept them up and separated the waves. He left the Jin River Prefecture and returned to where he came from. At the same time, a letter flew from the hinterland of the North Dark Star continent towards the Shonyan Mountain. When it reached the altar, it was immediately noticed by Jingyu. He looked at it and chanted a spell to summon it. He took a look and immediately walked to Zhang Yan's seat with the letter. He bowed and said, Master, it is a letter from Zhao Chong. Zhang Yan was meditating. When he heard it, his eyes opened immediately. He did not leave for the past few days because he was waiting for this letter. He took it and read it carefully. After a long time, he raised his head and looked at the river in front of him. He thought, Zhao Chong did well on this matter. I can return to the mountain with a peace of mind. Zhao Chong came out this time under his order to find his mother's tribe, the Zhao clan, and to find a way to enter their tribe so that he could grasp the tribe's authority in the future. This was not a decision made by Zhang Yan on a whim. It was a plan that he had planned for a long time. After Zhao Chong was born, his mother implanted a broken bone of the previous monster king of the Quan Tu tribe on his forehead. If not for this, the Quan Tu tribe and the monster king would not have sent so many people to chase after him. Although Zhao Chong did not cultivate in strength, the bone had long merged with him. With 2 different bloodlines, it was not an exaggeration to say that he was a descendant of the Sky Demon. If he could enter the Zhao clan with this title, he would be able to achieve great things. Although Zhang Yan had subdued the Yuyuan tribe, he would not place all his chips on a single person. Zhao Chong was a spy. This way, he would be able to grasp any changes in the situation in the northern Dark Star continent at any time. If the other tribes were to make a move, he would be able to prepare in advance. When the letter arrived, Zhang Yan thought that the situation in the North Dark Star continent had been sorted out. He looked for Wei Zihong and instructed him to stay behind to deal with the aftermath. He then rested for a night. When the sun rose the next day, he boarded the Twin Dragon's flying carriage and brought thousands of disciples back to Qinsong School. Floating Astronomy. Chapter 806. When Zhang Yan returned to the mountain, he walked along the river, traveling slowly as if he was making some arrangements. After a month, he returned to the clear serenity heavenly lake. He got off the carriage at the peak of the mountain and went to the floating celestial palace to see sect Master Qin. He reported everything that had happened and his arrangements in detail. At noon, he came out of the celestial palace. Just now, he returned to the cave residence. Jingyu came to report, "Master, Spiritual Master Han has come to visit and has been waiting for 2 hours." Zhang Yan thought for a moment and said, "Invite him in quickly." After a moment, Han Wangke walked in and greeted, "Junior brother Zhang, I'm sorry to disturb your cultivation." Zhang Yan returned the greeting and invited him to sit down. He asked, "Senior brother came here because you found out some information from the 2 demonic cultivators?" Han Wangke sighed and said, "I am ashamed, those 2 people's divine souls have already been sealed with a forbidden technique. Whenever they talk about the sect's secrets, once they open their mouths, their souls will scatter and scatter. Therefore, they only talked about some trivial matters, but I have already recorded them in this jade slip." As he said this, he handed over a jade scroll. Zhang Yan took the jade scroll. He knew the difficulty of this and didn't blame him. He smiled, "I've troubled senior brother." Han Wangke just shook his head and hesitated for a while before raising his head. "There's one more thing. Recently, I've been feeling like I'm about to break through. If I have all the external items, I might be able to achieve something in a year or 2. Zhang Yan sat up straight and his eyes lit up. He cupped his hands and said, "Then I'll have to congratulate senior brother. What external items are you lacking? I can find them for senior brother." Han Wangke didn't have much time left to live and didn't want to have another chance to increase his cultivation. If he could have a 3rd-tier Yuanian cultivator by his side before he went to the demonic cave, then he would have a better chance against the demonic sect. Han Wangke didn't stand on ceremony. He said directly, "I've actually gathered most of the external ingredients. Now, I'm only missing 1,000 bushels of white cloud elite. However, this item isn't easy to gather, so I can only shamelessly ask for junior brother's help." In terms of righteous heroes, the purple cloud righteous heroes were the best. However, this item was extremely rare and had only been recorded in ancient books. Next to it was the Qingyang Ganjing. When Zhang Yan went to the Middle Pillar continent to break through to the Gate Realm, he had used this item. This was the White Skull Astral Hero. However, if one were to use it to break through to the Gate Realm, it wouldn't be better if the stellar heroism grade was of the highest quality. Rather, it would depend on whether or not it was suitable for one's body. However, Zhang Yan agreed immediately and said with a smile, "This is easy. Senior brother, please wait for a moment." Although he had a lot of cultivation materials in his hands, he was only at the level of a core formation cultivator. Anything that was used by Yuanian cultivators for cultivation was controlled by the 3 great halls and not something he could easily use. However, he wasn't in a hurry. In such a large Qinsong school, it wasn't hard to find the 1,000-turn White Lotus Gang hero. He immediately wrote a letter and summoned his 3rd disciple, Wang Kaiwei, and instructed her to deliver it to the Profound Water True Palace. Han Wangke saw this. He knew that this matter would be handled properly. He relaxed a little. Although due to his limited lifespan, even if he improved his cultivation, he couldn't enter the Grotto Heaven. However, if he could make great contributions during the battle for the Devil's Cave, his disciples would be able to gain a firm foothold in the sect. Taking advantage of his free time, he said, "I received a letter yesterday. My martial brother, Gutong Shan, originally wanted to join us in the expedition to the northern underworld, but he was invited by a good friend of his to forge a treasure. That's why he missed the opportunity. He will return in 7 days and come to visit junior brother Zhang. I didn't mean to stand you up last time. I hope junior brother Zhang doesn't blame me." Zhang Yan didn't mind. The 2 chatted and laughed. Unknowingly, an hour had passed. Wang Kaiwei had already returned. After entering the abode, she bowed to the 2 of them and cast a spell to release a ship full of gang heroes. She said, "Master, there are 2,000 buckets of White Bun Gang heroes here. Jinren Chi said that if there is a shortage, a letter will be sent over." Zhang Yan looked at Han Wanka and smiled. Senior brother, what do you think? Han Wanka was happy to see that he got gang heroes so quickly. He stood up and said, Thank you, junior brother Zhang. He was in a hurry to go back to cultivate. After saying a few more words, he stood up and left. Zhang Yan didn't ask him to stay. He ordered Wang Kaiwei to send him off. Then, he returned to his bed and looked at the map on the wall. His gaze gradually became deep. Although the northern underworld continent had been pacified, the Devil sect had many tricks up their sleeves. There were only 30 years left before the Devil's Cave would appear. It was very likely that they would do something else. Thus, he couldn't just passively deal with them. He had to take the initiative and force them to fight. It was just that the Devil's sect had been dormant and did not come out. At most, they would only attack some small sections. They rarely fought with the top 10 sects, especially after the battle at Linqing Temple. They were even more careful and rarely showed themselves. It was very difficult to find them. Zhang Yan laughed coldly. Since they didn't want to make a move, then he would find a way to force them out. Before subduing Yuan's tribe, he had already planned to do so. Now it was time to act. He said in a low voice, Jing Yu, the letters I drafted earlier can be sent out now. Jing Yu's spirit was lifted. I will do it now. Not long after, dozens of letters turned into spiritual light and flew out from the clear nether heavenly lake. They flew towards the various sects around Qinsong School. An hour later, in Biu Pavilion, Sect Master Yuqing looked at the letter in her hand with a solemn expression. She didn't speak for a long time. Yan Xiaoyang was pacing around anxiously. Looking at his mother's expression, he couldn't help but ask, Mother, what does the letter say? Yuqing put down the letter and sighed. Zhenren Zhang sent a decree. He ordered us to send disciples to investigate the spiritual opportunity of the earth veins in Donghua continent. He also ordered us to set up a spell altar at the place where the spiritual opportunity is so that we can discover the location of the Devil's Cave in advance. What? Yan Xiaoyang immediately jumped up and said agitatedly, What did I say? What did I say? Even if elder sister and that Han brat became Dao companions, Qinsong School wouldn't treat us as one of their own. Isn't it here now? Setting up the spell altar? How could the 6 demon sects just sit back and watch? This is clearly asking us to fight to the death with them. Yuqing's expression was displeased as she reprimanded, My son, don't talk nonsense. Things aren't as simple as you think. Yan Xiaoyang said angrily, Is what I said wrong? Yuqing rubbed her forehead as if she couldn't do anything to her son. She put away the letter and explained patiently, Biu Pavilion was able to survive until now in the Devil's Calamity. This is all thanks to the protection of Qinsong School. Now that we are of use, if we refuse, not to mention offending Qinsong School, it won't be reasonable. Moreover, Zhenren Zhang has a far-reaching plan. He even has a backup plan. If we are careful, even if there are losses, it won't be too big. Yan Xiaoyang sneered. Who knows how many disciples there are in Qinsong School? Why didn't they send them out? They are just using the lives of Biu Pavilion's disciples to exchange for the lives of Qinsong's disciples. Yuqing's expression changed slightly. Yuqing said sternly, You mustn't say this outside. Do you hear me? Yan Xiaoyang seemed to know that he had said something wrong. He snorted and didn't say anything else. Yuqing pondered for a while and activated her mana, forming a talisman. She then stored it in a letter and was about to send it out when she saw a spiritual light circling outside the cave. She was surprised and waved her hand to keep it. When she opened it, she realized that it was sent by Linqing Monastery's monastery master, Song Hong. She took out the letter and looked at it for a while. She thought to herself, so many fellow Taoists received this letter. If that's the case, there's no need for me to send letters elsewhere. She instructed the maid beside her, Go and invite Qiu Nyangzi here. The maid obeyed and left. Not long after, a beautiful woman with a slender waist and bright eyes stepped into the cave. She bowed and said, Qiu Hanyue greets Pavilion Master Yan. Yuqing hurriedly returned the greeting. How can I be worthy of Taoist Qiu's greeting? She knew about it. Qiu Nyangzi was Fan Chongqing's eldest disciple and was considered Meng Zhen's grand disciple. She had always been on good terms with Zhao Yu Heavenly Lake, so she had always been polite and didn't dare to slight her. Qiu Hanyue blinked her eyes. She smiled and said, Hanyue received Uncle Master Zhang's letter and read the details in it. Pavilion Master Yen invited Hanyue here for this matter, right? Yuqing saw that she had already said it, so she nodded and said, Indeed. Bu Pavilion has been protected by your sect for the past 200 years. Now that you need us, we will naturally help. I wonder how long will it take to set up the matter mentioned in Jinren Zhang's letter? Qiu Hanyue smiled and said, Seeing is believing. Whether it is done or not, we will know once we try. Yuqing was surprised and said, Could it be that Jinren Zhang has already made the arrangements? Qiu Hanyue smiled and said, Outside the mountain gate is the Crooked River, a tributary of the Long River. It is connected to the East Sea. Pavilion Master Yen, why don't you go out and take a look? Yuqing thought for a moment and nodded, All right. Qiu Hanyue smiled and said, The Crooked River outside the mountain gate is a tributary of the Long River, connected to the East Sea. The two of them moved out of the mountain gate. After walking for more than 10 miles, they landed near a fast-flowing river. Qiu Hanyue followed the instructions in the book and performed a spell by the river bank. Yuqing watched closely from the side. Not long after, they heard a gurgling sound in the water. A green carp popped its head out and wagged its tail at the two of them. If one looked closely, they could see that its fins were like a pair of thin flying wings. Its eyes were very intelligent. It was obviously a fish demon. Yuqing's gaze was a little strange. She walked forward and performed a spell, forming a talisman and throwing it down. The green carp leaped up and caught the talisman in its mouth. Then, it jumped into the water and disappeared. In less than a moment, they saw an extremely fast wave on the surface of the water. When it reached the side, there was a rumble, and a burly and majestic demon general in full armor jumped out of the water. He cupped his fists at the two of them and said in a rough voice, Little demon Hijua, what instructions do you have for me? Qiu Hanyue said indifferently, We called you here to see if you are slacking off. Hijua didn't feel afraid. He bowed down and said, Jinren Zhang ordered us to stand guard here. This little demon would never dare to make a perfunctory response. Qiu Hanyue snorted and waved her hand, saying, You pass this time. Go. Hijua bowed and took his leave. Qiu Hanyue turned back and said to Yuqing, Pavilion Master Yen, Uncle Master Zhang said that in at most a year, wherever there is a river in the north, there will be a demon general standing guard to protect the disciples of the celestial sect. With this, will your sect be able to build the altar with peace of mind? Yuqing sighed and said, Jinren Zhang is indeed amazing to be able to use the North Underworld demon tribe for his own purposes. Although my Blue Feather Pavilion can ride birds and tame beasts, compared to Jinren Zhang, we admit that we are inferior. With this, our disciples will no longer have to fear the cultivators of the demon sect when they travel outside. Chapter 807. On the Shueshua sect's platform, 3 elders on duty were talking. Looking over, their expressions were solemn. They came here to see Bailey Qingyin, but after waiting for more than 2 hours, they still weren't called in. An elder surnamed Yu couldn't wait any longer. He walked over to a Taoist servant and said, I'll have to trouble this servant to send another message. The Taoist boy hurriedly said, I don't dare. Master is receiving guests, please don't make things difficult for me. Elder Yu frowned and asked, Who is inside? Why is it taking so long? The Taoist boy bowed repeatedly and said he didn't know. Elder Yu had no choice but to retreat. After another moment, the cave door opened and the 3 became spirited. They looked up and saw a Taoist in white with outstanding bearing. This person held a green jade flute, his eyebrows extended to his temples, and he wore a tall crown. He walked outside with his hands behind his back and his chin slightly raised, saying, Senior apprentice Brother Bailey is in seclusion, so I'm in charge of all matters in the sect. He pointed at a person from Daoren and said, Li Xiu, you go first. Li Xiu smiled and cupped her hands, saying, Junior apprentice Brother Feng is back. No wonder Senior apprentice Brother Bailey has no time to see us. Did your trip to Netherworld Spring Sect go smoothly? Taoist Feng waved his hand and said coldly, let's catch up later and talk about business first. Li Xiu felt a little embarrassed by his impoliteness and coughed. She thought about her words and said, in the past month, the sects in the north have been acting strangely. They're setting up altars, restrictive formations, and digging rivers at the place where spiritual opportunity is condensed. They seem to be plotting something big. Taoist Feng raised his eyebrows and looked at the other elders. Are you all here for this as well? The elder surnamed Yu stepped forward and said in a deep voice, that's right. This old man believes that this was Zhang Yan's idea. It seems he's investigating the direction of the spiritual opportunity in the earth veins. Maybe he wants to find the place where the spiritual point converges. Taoist Feng sneered and said, what a joke. The spiritual opportunity of the earth meridian goes through thousands of twists and turns, and there's no clue to find it. As for where the spiritual point will appear, the Taoist masters of Dongtian still can't figure it out. Do you think he can find it with just a few magic altars? Elder Yu solemnly said, Junior Martial Brother Feng, you mustn't underestimate this matter. In the past month, these small sects have constructed no less than 20 altars. But what if it was 1 year, 10 years, 20 years, or even 30 years? If I don't think of a way to contain it, it will be very disadvantageous to me. Another elder also stood up and echoed, Senior Martial Brother Yu is right. Our sect is located in the northern border and is closest to Qinsong School. If the Devil's Cave appears in the northern lands, with these altars around, they might be able to detect the location of the Spirit's Cave and lose the initiative. Taoist Feng raised his eyebrows and said, even so, there are only 20 altars around, yet you guys can't deal with it. As he said this, his gaze swept back and forth between the three of them and he coldly asked, what's the reason? Li Xiu hesitated for a moment before saying, these altars are mostly constructed beside rivers, lakes, and streams. Previously, it's not that we didn't send disciples to stop them, but in every river, there are great aquatic demons hiding. Previously, every time we attacked, we were stopped by them. It's just that we gave them a warning beforehand, causing them to be on guard. Taoist Feng said mockingly, the northern underworld's demon cultivators, don't tell me it's Yuan tribe. Li Xiu vaguely said, which tribe it is yet to be confirmed. Taoist Feng coldly sneered and said, if I remember correctly, the matter of roping in the northern underworld's demon cultivators was Senior Martial Brother Li's doing. Now, not only did you fail to accomplish your task, but you've also brought trouble upon yourself. You even want the sect to take care of the aftermath for you. What's the meaning of this? Li Xiu's expression turned ugly when he was reprimanded in front of her. Elder Yu hurriedly came to smooth things over and said, Junior Martial Brother Feng, now is not the time to look into who's right and who's wrong. We should discuss a countermeasure. Taoist Feng said indifferently, then, what do you think we should do now? Elder Yu said seriously, we can't just rely on the core transformation realm disciples now. Only by sending out the sect's Yuanying realm elders can we break out of this situation. Taoist Feng said coldly, have you ever thought that if this is Zhang Yan's plan, it won't be so simple? Elder Yu said in a deep voice, I've also thought about it. Zhang Yan just wants to force us to come out and face the enemy head-on, thereby weakening the spirit gate's strength. However, this is an overt plot, and there's no way out. We have to accept it whether we want to or not. Taoist Feng looked over and said, Elder Yu, have you ever thought that guarding the altars also requires manpower? Right now, Zhang Yan is using those small sects for his own use, but how many disciples can he have? How many altars can he set up? According to Elder Li, it won't take 10 years, but 3 to 5 years. Elder Yu shook his head and said, Junior Martial Brother Feng, you haven't clearly seen how ruthless this plan is. This move isn't limited to just Qinsong School. If we don't retaliate, the profound sects in the world will follow suit, and the consequences will be unimaginable. Li Xiu was shocked and said, that's right, Junior Martial Brother. I didn't expect this. Taoist Feng was first stunned when he heard this, then his expression turned solemn. It was obvious that he also realized that he had to treat this matter seriously. Seeing that he was deep in thought, Elder Yu and Li Xiu looked at each other and said, although Senior Marshal Brother Bailey asked Junior Marshal Brother Feng to take charge of the overall situation, this is a serious matter. Why don't we go and ask Senior Marshal Brother Bailey for his opinion? Daoist Feng raised his head and said with a burning gaze, I, Feng Qingping, can still bear such a small matter. Elder Yu bowed and said, it's better to act early than late. Then, please give the order, Junior Marshal Brother Feng. Daoist Feng thought for a while and said, going against Zhang Yan head-on is a bad idea. I want to start with a small sect to intimidate the other sections. Among these sects, do you know which one has the best relationship with Qinsong School? Li Xiu said, Linqing Monastery, Bu Pavilion, North Star Sect. These three sects have a good relationship with Bright Nether Heavenly Lake. However, in terms of closeness, it's Bu Pavilion. The daughter of this sect's pavilion master is the Dao companion of Zhang Yan's seventh disciple, so the two sects are very close. Daoist Feng said, then it's this sect. Elder Yu stroked his beard and said, the Bu Pavilion's mountain gate formation is passed down from Nanhua sect. How are you going to break it, Junior Marshal Brother Feng? Daoist Feng waved his sleeve and said, this is easy. I'll ask Senior Uncle to borrow the Blood Salamander Earth Pot. It's not difficult to break their mountain gate. Li Xiu's eyes lit up and nodded. If we have the Blood Salamander Earth Pot, it's not difficult to break this sect's mountain gate. However, once this sect is besieged, Zhang Yan will definitely come to their rescue. If he comes personally, how are we going to deal with him? Daoist Feng laughed and said, what's there to be afraid of? If Zhang Yan really comes to our rescue, I'll hold him back halfway. My cultivation is not any weaker than his, so I can take this chance to fight with him. Elder Yu nodded and said, this plan is feasible. Zhang Yan doesn't have any cave master behind him, so he won't be able to mobilize many people in a hurry. However, we need to pay attention to one person. Qinsong School's Daylight Hall Elder, Ping Yuzhou. We don't know why this person is serving under Zhang Yan now, but he's also a third-stage cultivator. If Junior Marshal Brother goes to stop Zhang Yan, who will stop him if he comes? Daoist Feng smiled faintly and said, fellow Daoist Su from Bone In sect has always been on good terms with me. I can write a letter to him to hold Ping Yuzhou back. Elder Yu became excited and said, good, this is a good plan. As long as we break through Bu Pavilion's mountain gate, those small sects will know that even Qinsong School can't protect them. Then, they'll definitely hold back. Li Xiu's eyes flickered and said, I think we can first send a few people to pretend to besiege Linqing Monastery and create a diversion. Feng Qingping looked around and said, let's do it this way. Tomorrow, everyone will follow me to attack Bu Pavilion. After we break through the mountain gate, we'll kill everyone. At the upper reaches of the Crooked River, where it intersected with the Long River, there was a 60 feet tall altar. Hundreds of Bu Pavilion disciples were casting spells below, moving jade stones and setting up restriction array flags. Yan Xiaoyang and an elder surnamed Gu were on guard outside. Although they were under Qinsong School's orders, Bu Pavilion didn't dare to go deep into the mainland for the past 20 days. They only built altars on both sides of the river. Elder Gu looked at the scene in front of him and said emotionally, fortunately, the jade stone array flags used to set up the altars are all sent by Qinsong School. If it's my Bu Pavilion, I'm afraid we'll be emptied if we have to set up a dozen altars like this. Yan Xiaoyang curled his lips and said, this is what Qinsong School should do. Otherwise, how can we put in the effort and also the money? Elder Gu heard that he seemed to have something against Qinsong School in his words and was shocked. He looked around and said, apprentice nephew, please be careful with your words. Qinsong School Jinrenkai is not far away. If he hears you, I'm afraid it will hurt the friendship between the two sections. Zhang Yan's plan was not only to ask the sects to set up altars at the places where spiritual vigor gathered, but also to send out a few nascent soul cultivators to patrol the places. This was to guard against the leader of the Devil's Doctrine, and also to keep an eye on the sects so that they would not dare to slack off. Since Kai Rongju had gone to the Bu Pavilion yesterday, the disciples did not have to work hard. Yan Xiaoyang scoffed and said in a muffled voice, got it. Elder Gu was afraid that he would lose his temper and say something inappropriate, so he changed the topic and said, "Apprentice nephew Yen, in my opinion, why don't we set up the altar at the center of the mountains and rivers tomorrow? What do you think, apprentice nephew?" Yen Xiaoyang frowned and said, "Elder Gu, don't you know that if we leave the protection of the river, the lives of our disciples will be in danger?" Elder Gu smiled and said, "That's not difficult. Our Donghua Northland is covered with a dense water network. If there are no water channels, we can just use mana to dig one out. Moreover, the places where spiritual vigor gathers are mostly places with beautiful scenery." Yen Xiaoyang suddenly interrupted him and said, "Elder Gu, this method was decided by my mother. You don't have to worry too much about it." Elder Gu was silent, then he sighed and said earnestly, "Apprentice nephew, I know that you are worried about the safety of our disciples, but I'm sure you know how the other sects are doing. We are considered to be in-laws with Qinsong School, so we can't do badly, right?" When Yen Xiaoyang heard the word in-laws, he couldn't help but feel dissatisfied. At this moment, there was a bubbling sound in the river. Following that, a carp floated to the surface with a blood-stained letter in its mouth. His expression changed and he hurriedly took the letter. When he opened it in a hurry, his face turned pale. Elder Gu asked with concern, "What's the matter?" Yen Xiaoyang took a breath and said in a low voice, "The 2 altars downstream have been broken just now." Chapter 808. In the middle of the crooked river, Qiu Hanyue sat on an altar with her hands on her knees. The river in front of Blue Feather Pavilion was crisscrossed. In addition, it had a close relationship with Bright Nether Heavenly Lake. Thus, the sect leader ordered the disciples to build 5 altars. However, even though the altar had been set up, it still needed to set up the formation flags and send disciples to guard it. In this way, the manpower seemed to be slightly stretched. Moreover, she had nothing to do in the sect, so she took the initiative to volunteer and came here to guard one of the altars. At this moment, there was a sound of water. Suddenly, a monster carp leaped out and spat out a talisman on the shore. Its fins faced up, and it bowed like a human before diving back into the water. Qiu Hanyue reached out and took the talisman. After taking a look, she revealed a look of shock. 2 altars downstream were destroyed? She shook her head and complained, "Why did you use a monster carp to send a message for such an urgent matter? You should have used a flying letter." After the altars were set up, they agreed to send a message every hour to prevent any changes. However, as a result, they had to send at least 20 times a day. The messenger flying letters used by the cultivators of the big sects were made of dozens of refined external medicines. Once they were used, the spiritual vigor would be lost. Therefore, if they were purely using flying letters, other than the big sects of the Shenmen, no small sects would be able to afford it. However, using a monster carp to send a talisman was not costly. As long as one chanted an incantation by the side of the river and through a letter, it would automatically take over the transmission at an extremely fast speed. Apart from being slower than a flying letter, there were no other flaws. Sometimes, it was even more secretive. However, in an emergency, if one didn't know how to be flexible, it would delay matters. Qiu Hanyue guessed. If the person who destroyed the altars hadn't retreated, then he shouldn't be far from where she was now. With a swipe of her white hand, she plucked up a formation flag and gently shook it. In a split second, the spell altars restriction was activated, and layers of spiritual light rippled. Then, with a light tap of her finger, she buried a few magic tools in a few secret places. After doing all this, she calmed down. The other party could destroy 2 altars in a short period of time. She definitely couldn't underestimate him. If he could defend this place, he would defend it. If he couldn't win, he could use this as a cover to escape. After about half an hour, she saw a black flying boat coming from downstream. His speed was neither fast nor slow. There were 2 people standing on the boat. The one on the left wore a black hat. The young cultivator with loose sleeves had a gentle and warm smile on his face. The person standing on the right was slightly shorter, but very sturdy. His appearance was rough, and his eyes were wide open. A thick beard was casually scattered in front of his chest, allowing the strong wind to blow against it. When Qiu Hanyue saw the two of them, she let out a sigh of relief. If the Yuanian cultivators were here, it would be very difficult to deal with them. Fortunately, they were both at the core formation stage, so she thought she could handle them. He thought to himself, since these two didn't rely on their own magic power to break the altar, then they must have relied on magic treasures. Thinking up to this point, she was much calmer than she was just now. If it was just a competition of magic treasures, she didn't fear cultivators of the same generation. After the flying boat arrived, it circled above the altar a few times. The sturdy cultivator looked down and said, "This place is well guarded. I'm afraid it won't be as easy to attack as the previous ones." The two altars in front were slightly inexperienced, and they were clumsy when dealing with it. Moreover, they had supreme treasures in their hands, so they easily broke through the altars. However, the cultivator here seemed to be an experienced Daoran. He wasn't someone who could be easily bullied. Hanji looked down and said, "Let's just go upstream. Blue Feather Pavilion has 5 altars. It's not a big deal to miss one. If we stop here, we'll give the people behind us a chance." The sturdy cultivator laughed and said, "Junior Martial Brother Han, you must be joking. With the magic treasures you borrowed from Enlightened Master Wen, dealing with these altars is a piece of cake. Looks like this girl has some tricks up her sleeve. I'm willing to give it a try." Han Ji smiled and said, "I didn't borrow it. I just took it behind the guard boy's back. After using it, I still have to return it. Senior Martial Brother Huang, you better keep your mouth shut." Huang Daoist waved his hand and said, I know. We've both used magic treasures before. If Enlightened Master Wen hears about it, no one will benefit. Why would I make things difficult for myself?" The two of them pointed at the altar but didn't come over. Qiu Hanyue couldn't help but feel angry. However, this altar wasn't like the Mountain Gates formation. It didn't have the power to attack, so she couldn't do anything to the other party. With a thought, he raised his hand and tossed out a 7-colored fragrant flower. When it reached the sky, the petals scattered and danced in the air, colorful and gorgeous. At first, there were only a few dozen petals, but after a few breaths, there were thousands of petals. This was given to her by an enlightened master from the mountain sect when he came to Qinsong School to visit Qi Yuntian. It was called the 7-killing fragrant flower formation. It could use one flower to create a forbidden formation, and it was the sect's most famous technique. Most core formation cultivators in the sect relied on this technique when they went out. Now that she used it, Huang Daoist couldn't help but be shocked. He then chuckled and opened his hand. Immediately, a ball of bloody light appeared in his palm and poured down like a curtain. When it came into contact with the petals, it made a sizzling sound and lost its spiritual light. It became dry and charred, falling down in large handfuls. Qiu Hanyue immediately recognized who it was and thought, so it's a cultivator from the Blood Soul sect. She was also someone who didn't want to admit defeat. She activated her mystic art and the Dan Sha in her body turned into a clear blue spring. It rushed up and immediately dispersed most of the bloody light. Han Ji's expression changed and he asked, "Xuan's a true Wonder Upper Cave technique? Which enlightened master of Qinsong School are you under?" Even in Qinsong School, this technique couldn't be taught to just anyone. Those who could learn this technique were mostly under the Grotto Heaven sect. Qiu Hanyue said warily, "Who are you? Tell me your name first." Han Ji smiled and said, "My surname is Han. Speaking of which, I have a lot to do with your Qinsong School." Huang Daoist laughed and said, "Junior Brother Han, what's there to hide?" Then, little lady, let me tell you. This junior brother of mine was originally a disciple of the Yunlang House of Han. Such a talented person, but your Qinsong School couldn't keep him. Instead, he joined my Blood Soul sect. It's clear that my spirit gate should take advantage of this and rise. Sooner or later, I will replace your mystic gate." Qiu Hanyue was surprised and said, "The Yunlang House of Han?" Han Ji frowned and said, "Senior Brother Huang, why are you talking to her? Let's not waste time here and go somewhere else." Huang Daoist saw how calm Qiu Hanyue was and knew that it would be impossible for him to successfully take down this place. He agreed and fought for a while longer. Then he found a chance to hit the waves and turn the flying boat around, heading towards the sky. Han Ji instantly relaxed and thought to himself, today's warning can be considered as me repaying senior brother Zhang's favor. He was now a disciple of Wen Qingxiang. It was just that half a day ago, when he heard that Feng Qingping was going to act against Blue Feather Pavilion, he wanted to warn them. After thinking about it, he invited a fellow sect member to come here and destroy the altar that Blue Feather Pavilion had created. Although he didn't say anything, he knew that as long as Zhang Yan heard his name and did this, he would most likely understand the deeper meaning behind it. At the very least, he would be alerted. At the very least, he would be alerted. Not long after the two left, in the river beside the altar, there was a sudden tumble, and two demon cultivators popped their heads out. One of them was Yuyuan tribe's elder Feng. He stood on the waves and said, "What a pity. If those two had come down a bit more, I would have definitely taught them a lesson." The other person was also a demon tribe elder. He said, "It's not a pity. We can't afford to offend Qinsong School, but can we afford to offend the Blood Soul sect?" Elder Mian narrowed his eyes and said with some eagerness, "Taoist Qi is right, but do you think we can fight against the mystical and demonic sects if we build an altar in the northern Darkstar continent like the Yutsong sect?" He could tell that if the altar was built like this, over time, the northlands of the Donghua continent would gradually spread out a huge net. The situation where the demonic sects could come and go as they pleased would definitely change. If this method could be used in the Donghua continent, it meant that it could also be used in the North Darkstar continent. If it could be done, then Qinsong School wouldn't be able to control Yuyuan tribe anymore. Thinking of this, he felt a little excited. Elder Qi, however, was not optimistic. He shook his head and said, "Taoist Miao, don't forget that this method was created by Zhang Zhenren. How could he not be on guard against us? Moreover, Qinsong School has always had the ability to overturn the seas and rivers. No matter what, they won't be able to get away scot-free. Also, setting up an altar would require a lot of precious materials. Only a large Xianmen sect like Qinsong School could do this. If it were someone else, how could it be done?" When Elder Miao heard this, it was as if a bucket of cold water was poured on him. The thoughts that had arisen just now were immediately extinguished. He said in a low voice, "Indeed, I was thinking too much. But Zhang Zhenren is spending so much today. As time goes by, I'm afraid that the precious materials will be uncountable. He isn't a disciple of any Grotto Heaven Zhenren. Isn't he afraid that someone in Qinsong School will be unhappy with him?" Elder Qi smiled playfully and said, "Then let's see who will have the last laugh. If Zhang Zhenren wins, I think no one will say anything about this. But if he loses, Xianmen, the devil sect, isn't it the same no matter who we join?" Qinsong School, Fangchen Courtyard. In front of the earth fire heavenly furnace, more than 100 cultivators were controlling the earth fire and turning the spell flags. At this moment, the heat gradually subsided, and a flying star-wheel palace was about to be built. Zhang Yan stood above, and Yu Chongyang accompanied him. The latter pointed below and said, "Fangchen Courtyard now has enough manpower, and with the precious materials sent by Zhenren, we can build 5 flying star-wheel palaces in half a year, and 200 in 20 years. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. To do a good job, one must first sharpen his tools. He came to Fangchen Courtyard to supervise the building of the Flying Star-Wheel Palace, so that it would be useful when the Devil's Cave appeared in the future. Originally, what he valued the most were the Soaring Phoenix Golden Temple and the Flying Dragon Carriage, used by the Yuanying cultivators. However, the precious materials used to build these things were in the hands of the 3 main halls, and they were not something he could use at the moment. Even if he could ask Qi Yuntian and Huoxian to help, they would not be able to help much. Instead of that, it was better to build more flying star-wheel palaces. He looked for a while and said in a low voice, "If there are many precious materials, don't save them for me. Build as many as you can." Yu Chongyang could not help but look sideways, and his gaze was a little complicated. He could see that the number of these precious materials was almost the limit that Zhang Yan could use as a chief. It should be known that when Qinsong School fought with the demon cultivators of 3 lakes, the number of flying palaces built was less than 40. If they did not win the battle of the mystical demons this time, there would be no way out. Even if they could go to the Duzhen Hall, the opportunity to be promoted to the heavenly abode would most likely fall into the hands of others. Zhang Yan did not hear his reply for a long time. He turned his head and said indifferently, "Is there any difficulty?" Yu Chongyang met his gaze, which was like the morning stars, and could not help but lower his head. He composed himself and said with a straight face, "There is no problem. I will do my best and will not delay Jinren's matter." Chapter 809. After 5 o'clock, Zhang Yan flew out of the Fangchen courtyard on a beam of light. He hadn't gone far when he saw a spiritual light flying toward him. He immediately stopped and caught it in his hand. He looked at it and discovered that it was an urgent letter from Qiu Hanyue. It said that a demonic cultivator had come to attack the altar this morning. It wasn't strange for the demonic sect to attack. The reason why Zhang Yan built the altar was to force them out so that he could deal with them one by one. But when he looked at the back, a name jumped into his eyes. Han Ji. He thought about it carefully, but he still recognized this person. When he went to the little demon cave to cultivate, this person was one of the people who went into the ocean with him. He helped him out and this person went to join the Blood Soul sect. Later on, he got bits and pieces of news about this person. He didn't think that he would suddenly appear here. But there was something strange. Why did this person reveal his name? Was it intentional or not? The letter described in detail that Han Ji came very suddenly. After breaking the 2 altars, he saw that the 2 altars below were well guarded, so he turned around and left. This action looked very normal, but after thinking about it, there seemed to be a different meaning in his actions and words. Thinking about this, Zhang Yan's heart moved slightly. He guessed a few possibilities. He kept the letter and used the conveyance light again to return to the clear darkness heavenly lake. In just a short while, he returned to the cave abode and sat down on the couch. The table was filled with documents from various sections. They were all reporting the number of altars built by each sect in the past month. He didn't mind the trivialities and carefully read through every letter. He saw that Linqing, Beichen, and Biyu were the most attentive. However, this was also because these 3 sects were on the banks of the river, so it was convenient for them to carry out their tasks. After he finished reading these, he found another letter underneath, and it was sent from Huanjin Temple. The person who sent the letter could be considered an old acquaintance. It was Zhao Hozhou who came to his cave abode to craft weapons. This time, this person heard that Zhang Yan had set up altars and restrictions everywhere. He guessed that the demonic sect might be forced to come out to fight, so he volunteered to help. Among the 3 southwest sects of the Celestial Sect of Wonders, only the Huanjin Temple could be considered as the oldest sect. However, for thousands of years, they often used the method of killing demons. As a result, there were too many casualties among the disciples. Among them, there was no lack of handsome disciples. Today, there were only 2 people in the Huanjin Temple. However, this was also determined by the nature of their martial arts. If he were to shut himself away, it would be difficult to nurture outstanding people. In order to deal with the devil's doctrine, Zhang Yan would never complain about having more disciples. Since there were people who were willing to come, of course he would not reject them. He immediately picked up his brush. He was prepared to write a reply personally to show his sincerity. At this moment, Jing Yu walked in with a stack of talismans and carefully placed them on the side of the table. When they were neatly arranged, he took out the top one and said softly, "Master, this is a flying letter from Linqing Monastery." He said that there was an urgent matter that required Master's personal attention. Zhang Yan flicked his wrist and wrote down the last few words. Then, he threw down the brush and took the letter from before. After opening it, he sneered and said, in the end, he couldn't hold it in any longer. This letter was sent by Yuan Yanhui and Weng Ziyuan. It said that demonic clouds covered the sky outside Green Bull Mountain and no less than 6 elders of the Devil's Doctrine appeared nearby. Looking at it, it seemed that they wanted to besiege the mountain. They were probably here to take revenge for what happened last time, so they immediately sent a letter asking for help. If he was only guessing that Han Ji might have come to warn him, then he was most likely sure now. Otherwise, the timing would not be so coincidental. However, looking at the situation revealed between the lines, although the cultivators of the Devil's Doctrine were outside Green Bull Mountain, it seemed like the situation was very urgent. However, on the surface, it only looked like they were a little stronger. They did not actually attack the mountain. Looking at it this way, there were only 2 goals. One was to surround Linqing Monastery and kill the people who came to help in revenge for the defeat last time. The other was to create a diversion. Linqing Monastery was only to attract their attention, but the main attack location was actually somewhere else. Zhang Yan judged that the possibility of the former was not high. Because the 6 great demon sects were still the weaker side compared to the 10 sects of the Celestial Sect, they had always tried their best to avoid a direct confrontation. If they really did so this time, he was extremely willing to fight them. If it was the latter, then where would the other party's real goal be? He thought about Han Ji's previous actions and the answer seemed to be on the verge of appearing. However, although Han Ji had received his kindness in the past, who knew how his personality had changed in the past 200 years? What if it was not a warning but a deliberate trap? He had to be on guard. He placed the letter on the table. If he were to fill in the gaps at the last moment, then he would be a step behind. Long before he ordered the sects to build the altar, he had already considered the possible scenarios clearly and had already made sufficient preparations. As long as his family did not panic, there would be no major problems. And the key point now was that he had finally forced this person out with great difficulty. His original goal had already been half achieved. The next step was to think of a way to make him stay. His gaze suddenly became deeper. The fish was already next to the bait, but it had not taken the bait yet. If his reaction was too much, it would be noticed by the people of the Devil sect first. If they retreated or chose another sect to attack, then it would be even more difficult to find an opportunity next time. Therefore, he had to make a reasonable arrangement to successfully lure them over. After thinking for a long time, he said to Jing Yu, "Go and invite Gu Tongshan Jinren to my place." About a moment later, a green-robed Taoist quickly walked over. This person's movements were graceful and his expression was frivolous. As soon as he entered the cave, he smiled and bowed. "Jinren Zhang greets you." Zhang Yan returned the greeting and said with a smile, "Gu Shixiang is the elder of the sect. If you think it is appropriate, you can call I Shidi." Gu Tongshan straightened his body and said, "Although I have returned to the sect, I have not regained my old identity. The title of elder does not live up to the name. But since Shidi Zhang said so, I will be presumptuous for once." The two sat down and exchanged some pleasantries. Zhang Yan then said, "Today, I invited Gu Shixiang to ask a favor." Gu Tongshan's spirits rose. He wasn't like Han and Kai, who had already made numerous contributions to the sect, but still hadn't been accepted as a disciple. Because of this, he was also anxious about this matter. Immediately, he said, "Junior Marshal Brother, please tell me. As long as I can contribute to the sect, I will agree." Zhang Yan said with a smile, "Gu Shixiang can definitely do this. Just now, I have received news that the Devil sect may want to make a move on a small sect in my sect. However, I do not know which sect it is. There are 2 most likely places, Linqing Temple and Blue Feather Pavilion. I have already made arrangements for Linqing Temple. Blue Feather Pavilion will be guarded by Senior Brother Gu." Gu Tongshan agreed without thinking. He said, "May I ask when we will leave?" Zhang Yan said, "The sooner the better." Gu Tongshan was also free and easy. He immediately stood up and bowed. "Then I will be on my way now. However, since the Devil sect has returned, they must have some powerful means. I will be thick-skinned this time. Can I ask Shidi Zhang to borrow the lofty cloud tower?" Zhang Yan smiled and took out a talisman from his sleeve and placed it in Gu Tongshan's hand. He said, "Senior Brother Gu, just take it." Once Gu Tongshan received the talisman, he immediately became 100 times more confident. He bowed and said, "I will not let you down." After saying that, he left the cave abode and did not hesitate for a moment. He flew towards the Blue Feather Pavilion. In the Blood Soul sect. On the sage meeting platform, Feng Qingping and the 6 elders on duty gathered together and were waiting for news from outside the mountain. In fact, there had already been a letter sent over previously. However, Feng Qingping was worried and it was not time to move yet. Hence, he ordered his trusted disciple to investigate. The night passed. When it was noon, another letter arrived and circled above everyone's heads. Feng Qingping raised his hand. He grabbed it and looked at it. After looking at it for 100 breaths, he flicked his finger and the book immediately turned into spots of spiritual light and dissipated. Li Xiu turned her head and said, "Junior brother Feng, can we move?" Feng Qingping said in a low voice, "Wait a little longer." Another 2 hours passed, and at the end of the day, the sky was already bright. Finally, there was a ray of dark light outside the abode. Below the platform, a disciple who looked capable came out and bowed to Feng Qingping. He said, "Sage Feng, the senior brothers have investigated. Qinsong School's Peng Yuzhou has indeed left Qinsong School and is now at Linqing Monastery. There is also a Yuanian cultivator at the Blue Feather Pavilion, but they have not found out who he is." Feng Qingping pondered for a while and looked over sharply. He asked, "Other than that, did Qinsong School do anything else?" That disciple said loudly, "No." Elder Yu smiled. "Looks like Qinsong School has not found out anything. Junior brother, in order to make a scene, Linqing Monastery had sent 6 elders. They are not able to deal with a 3rd-stage realm cultivator like Peng Yuzhou. Should we ask them to return?" Feng Qingping raised his hand. "No need. Since we are going, we must do our best. I have already invited Daoist Su to go over. In this way, we can keep a close eye on Peng Yuzhou and not let him spoil our plans." Elder Yu Daoren said, "Peng Yuzhou does not have much courage. Even if we remove the encirclement, he will not dare to come out before he is clear of my intention. In this way, Daoist Su and junior brother Feng can work together. Even if they are up against Zhang Yan, they will have a chance of winning." Feng Qingping seemed to be a little tempted. But after thinking about it carefully, he still did not agree to it. He said, "This is too risky. Don't mention it again." After saying that, he stood up and looked around. In the end, his gaze landed on Li Xiu. He said, "Elder Li, take the blood salamander pot and lead the rest to North Star sect. If Zhang Yan comes, I will hold him back. Whether we can break through this sect's mountain gate will depend on your ability." Everyone was stunned. Li Xiu asked in surprise, "Junior brother Feng, aren't we going to attack Blue Feather Pavilion?" Feng Qingping said indifferently, "That was what I thought yesterday, but I changed my mind today." He sneered in his heart. How could it be so easy to deal with Zhang Yan? Earlier, he had purposely revealed the purpose of this trip to spread the news. If there were spies in Shenmen sect in Blood Soul sect and they changed their target before leaving, then the other party's plan would definitely fail. By the time they realized it, it would be too late to mobilize manpower. Even if he was being paranoid, it did not matter. North Star sect and Qinsong School had a deep friendship, and they were also one of the sects that worked the hardest to build the altar. Slaughtering them would still be able to achieve their goal. Li Xiu's thoughts spun, and she understood this as well. Thus, she didn't speak any further and bowed to Feng Qingping before immediately calling out to the other 5 elders, and then she transformed into a streak that whistled towards the surface. Chapter 8:10. On Beichen Faction's Danyang Mountain, a few disciples who were on duty looked at the gloomy clouds that covered the sky. Their faces paled and their eyes were filled with fear. After a long while, one of them finally reacted and shouted, "Quick, go and report to the sect master. The demonic sect cultivators are invading Beichen Faction." A deacon elder arrived first. Seeing the chaos around and the situation was not right, he shouted angrily, "What are you panicking for? With the mountain gate formation, they won't be able to enter the mountain. Be careful and guard your positions." When the disciples present heard this, they thought about it and felt that it made sense. Only then did they feel slightly at ease. In less than 100 breaths' time, a ray of light flew up from the Zhujiang hut and headed straight for them. A sharp-eyed disciple shouted, "Elder Yen is here." The conveyance light was not fast. It steadily arrived in front of the mountain before slowly descending. Grand Elder Yen Jingting walked out from within. He looked at the disciples around him and smiled. "There's no need to gather here. Disperse." The disciples saw that he was relaxed and did not seem to care about the situation. They could not help but be influenced and returned to their positions. The chaotic situation quickly calmed down. Elder Yen looked at the slowly spinning demonic clouds in the sky, but he was not as relaxed as he looked. The appearance of such a situation meant that the other party had at least 6 nascent soul elders, which was why they were able to make such a scene. When he was ordered by Qinsong School to build the altar, he knew that the demonic sect would attack sooner or later. However, he did not expect that the first one to come would be the Beichen faction and so many people at once. Even when they attacked Linqing Temple, they did not have such a large formation. At this time, there was a sound from the pool not far away, and water splashed everywhere. Rays of light flew out from the pool, and about 100 disciples appeared from the water, but they all looked like they were still in a state of shock. The person leading them was Elder Yan's grandson, Yen Zhenhua. When he saw his grandfather here, he immediately came up and saluted. He said, "Elder." Elder Yen glanced at him and sighed. "How many people are missing?" Yen Zhenhua rejoiced. "We managed to retreat without a hitch. Not a single one was lost." These disciples were people who had gone out to build altars. Most of them did not have high cultivation. Just now, the devil sect's cultivators were rushing over. Strong winds and dark thunder shook the sky. They were all terrified. Originally, they thought that their lives would be in danger, but who would have thought that no one would pay attention to them, allowing them to successfully escape? Hearing this, Elder Yen nodded. His expression did not relax at all. Instead, it became serious. He thought to himself, "From the looks of it, it doesn't seem like he's here to put on a show of strength. It's very likely that he wants to catch me, Beichen, in one fell swoop. That's why he's not in a hurry to act." Although he was already prepared, he still felt a little worried after thinking about it, so he said in a low voice, "Set up the restrictions in my Zhujiang hut, but don't let the disciples notice it, so as to avoid shaking their hearts." Yen Zhenhua shuddered and said, "Ah Wang is saying." Elder Yen didn't bother to explain. He just waved his hand and said, "Go quickly, don't ask too many questions. Also, call your first mother over." Yen Zhenhua bowed and left in a hurry. Elder Yen glanced around and saw that the 100 or so disciples were at a loss. He couldn't help but frown. Just now, these disciples were frightened, and their minds might have been invaded by the demonic sect's secret technique. They couldn't let them go, or else there would be chaos in the sect. He said, "Don't panic. Beichen sect's mountain gate formation was passed down by the old ancestor from the Xianmen sect, Qingxi Temple. These few demonic cultivators can't do anything to it." He wasn't lying. Although the Beichen sect's mountain gate formation wasn't set up by Zhenren Dongtian, it was the foundation of the sect. Since the sect was founded, the past sect leaders had never neglected it. It had been maintained for hundreds and thousands of years. As long as it wasn't Zhenren Dongtian, it was enough to repel the enemy. After being comforted by him, although the disciples were still afraid, they slowly calmed down and weren't as panicked as just now. About 10 minutes later, a female cultivator in white flew over from afar and landed on the top of the mountain. The disciples all made way for her. Elder Yen looked back and said, "Madam is here." Lu Mainyang looked up at the sky and said, "Master, they're not friendly. I think we should immediately send a letter to Qinsong School to ask for help." She saw that Elder Yen was deep in thought and didn't say anything, so she said, "Now isn't the time to worry about face." Elder Yen shook his head and said, "This is the life and death of the sect. Why would I care about face? It's just that just now is thinking, how could the devil sect not know about the relationship between Beichen sect and Zhenrenzhang? If they're here for Beichen sect, then it's fine. Could it be that they want us to send a letter to ask for help?" Lu Mainyang said softly, Master's thoughts aren't unreasonable. It's just that at this time, it's not our turn to think about this. We should ask for what we should ask for. As for what we should do, Jinren Zhang will decide. Elder Yen couldn't help but pat his forehead and said, "Indeed, I'm worried too much." Lu Mainyang smiled sweetly and said, "Actually, if Master wants to know the purpose of this group of people, I have a plan." Elder Yen raised his hand and said, "I'll have to ask Madam." Lu Mainyang pinched the corner of her sleeve with one hand and pointed up with the other. She said, "Master, take out a letter. There's no need to write anything or hide anything. Just send it out. If they're here for Beichen sect, they'll definitely try to stop them and not let the news leak. If they're here for Jinren Zhang, they'll ignore it." Elder Yen thought about it. This method sounded very simple, but if he was from the devil sect, he might fall for it in a hurry. He immediately took out a letter and looked at the direction. He raised his hand and sent it out of the mountain. Just as the letter was about to reach the sky, an extremely fast black light appeared. After a few flashes, it blocked the letter. Elder Yan's heart sank when he saw it. He turned to Lu Mainyang and said, "They're here for us." Above the demonic clouds in the sky, Li Xiu looked at the person who intercepted the letter and laughed. "Junior brother Lu, you've fallen into a trap." That elder with the surname Lu had acted subconsciously and did not think too much about it. However, when he received the letter, he immediately reacted. If the other party really wanted to send a letter asking for help, why would they purposely send it to him? It was obviously a test. He was very annoyed and said, "I was careless." Li Xiu sneered in his heart. So what if the other party knew their purpose? As long as they had 2 hours, they could destroy this place. He took out a green glaze pot from his sleeve and tossed it into the sky. He pointed his hand and balls of sticky blood poured out from the mouth of the pot. When it landed on the clouds, it turned into large horned venomous snakes. They twisted their bodies. They flew towards the mountain guarding formation. This thing was formed by the Yin Hellblood Qi. Every time it was blocked by a talisman or restriction, it would contaminate the spiritual vigor until it was eroded away. However, this treasure was very powerful. It wasn't something he could control alone. He only lasted for a short while. He felt weak and said to the people around him, "Everyone, please lend me a hand." The other 5 elders listened to him. They quickly used their mana to help him activate the pot. Under the corrosion of the blood qi, the spiritual vigor of the formation was eroded layer by layer. The places that were attacked gradually collapsed. Although the inner sect disciples tried their best to repair it, the attacks from the other party were too fierce and they couldn't repair it in time. However, after a while, there was a sudden loud sound. Li Xiu felt the pressure in front of him lighten. He looked over and saw that the spiritual light at the corner of the formation was dim. He could vaguely see the scene in the mountain. It was obvious that it had been penetrated. He was excited and said, "Everyone, quickly follow me into the mountain." As he spoke, he took the lead in a streak of bloody light and rushed down. When the 5 devil sect elders behind him saw this, they did not hesitate and followed him into the formation. This time, they said they were breaking the formation, but it wasn't. They were just temporarily opening up a path. Not long later, the formation door would close. However, once they entered the sect, it would be easy to break the formation. With the strength of the 6 of them, it was enough to kill everyone in North Star City. Once Li Xiu was inside, he stopped the light and looked up. He saw Elder Yen and Lu Mainyang standing side by side 100 feet away. He sneered and waved his sleeve. He mocked, "A mantis trying to stop a chariot? You overestimate yourselves." When the 5 fellow disciples behind him entered one by one, he was about to step forward and make a move, but his eyelids suddenly twitched. He suddenly turned his head to look at a pool at the side, only to see the water in it swirling, and then a jade spring gushed out, reaching a height of 10 feet. From it came out 2 tall and sturdy old men in brocade robes, each holding a divine weapon in their hands. Elder Mian looked at the scene and cupped his hands at Elder Yen. He said, "Elder Yen, are we late?" Elder Yen laughed and said, "You're not late. You came at the right time." After the Yuan tribe was surrendered, 16 of the tribe elders were transferred by Zhang Yan to the south. They were scattered in various rivers and lakes. This was to weaken the Yuyuan tribe's strength. Secondly, if the other sects were besieged by the demon sect, they would be responsible for helping. Therefore, when the North Star sect was attacked, they immediately rushed over. At first, Li Xiu thought that they were Qinsong cultivators, so he was on guard. When he saw that they were only 2 Yao cultivators, he smiled disdainfully. Merely 2 carp demons were nothing in his eyes. Putting aside the fact that they had the advantage in numbers, even if they were to fight one-on-one, they wouldn't have any chance of winning. It would just take a little more effort. He immediately waved his hand and shouted, "Attack!" The 6 elders of the Blood Soul sect formed hand seals at the same time, and a banner rose from their backs. In an instant, countless blood souls flew out and howled, instantly enveloping the entire Danyang Mountain in a sea of blood. At the same time, 500 miles away from Danyang Mountain, Feng Qingping was dressed in white. He stood on a bright feathered fire crane and stared in the direction of the bright nether heavenly lake. As soon as Zhang Yan appeared, he would immediately stop him. He was confident in attacking the North Star sect this time. He thought to himself, fortunately, this Zhang Yan isn't under Master Dongtian's tutelage. He has only cultivated for 300 years, so his foundation is still shallow. There are very few people under him that can be used. Now, he is basically relying on his own strength to support the situation. If it were people like Huoxian or Duda, with the support of the 4 families, it wouldn't be so easy to deal with. As he thought about it, he suddenly saw a dazzling sword light tearing through the clouds in the sky. It shone brightly and headed straight for them. "It's coming!" Feng Qingping's expression changed. He shouted and rode the fire crane under his feet. It turned into a red light and took the initiative to meet the sword light. Chapter 8:11. Just as Feng Qingping took the initiative to attack Zhang Yan, neither of them expected that at this moment, many powerful cultivators in the Donghua continent would cast their gazes in this direction for various reasons. Yuanying's 3rd-level cultivators were rare even among the 16 sections. Most of them were disciples of the Grotto Heaven Jinren, and those who would inherit the position of Grotto Heaven in the future were mostly chosen from this generation. No sect could afford to lose them easily. As such, battles between cultivators like this were extremely rare, and this was the first time something like this had happened in the past several hundred years since the Devil Tribulation. On the Shueshua sect's ancient spring stage, when Qingxiang sat on a cliff, leaning against a towering pine tree. He was playing chess with an extraordinary Taoist. At this moment, it was his turn to place a chess piece. However, just as he picked up a chess piece from the chess box, he seemed to have sensed something. With a wave of his hand, a ray of spiritual light rippled in the air. Like the reflection of a mirror, it immediately revealed the location of Zhang Yan and Feng Qingping. He turned his head to the disciples below the stage and said, "This is a rare opportunity. Come and take a look." The Taoist smiled and put down the piece in his hand. When the disciples below the stage heard this, they all raised their heads and looked over. During the sword battle between the 16 sects, because the disciples of the sects had obtained the decree, they all fought in the star stones. Therefore, outsiders couldn't see anything and didn't know what was going on. In this battle, the disciples of the 6 great demon sects either fled or died. As for what method Zhang Yan used to obtain first place, no one knew for now. Now that they had taken this opportunity, it was likely that they would be able to see through some of his tricks. They would also be able to have a grasp of his true strength. Once the Devil's Cave appeared, if they were to face him, they would be able to have an aim. Han Ji was also one of these people. Just as he was observing, a voice suddenly rang out. Just as he was watching, a boy walked out from the crowd and bowed to him. "Are you senior brother Han?" Han Ji was a little confused. "Yes, it is me. Is there something you need from me?" The boy said, "I am here on the orders of the Zhenren to pass on a message to senior brother Han." Han Ji quickly stood up and said, "What message?" The boy said, "The Zhenren said that you came to Bu Pavilion to warn us that day. You owed us a favor in the past. This time, it could be said that he had returned the favor. In the future, you must focus on your cultivation and do not have any other thoughts. When Hanji heard that, he immediately turned pale with fright and his mind went blank. After a long time, only then did he regain his senses. However, he realized that the Taoist boy had already disappeared. On the other hand, he was sitting in his original position, and none of the disciples around him had any strange reactions. It was as if what had happened just now was just a dream. He wiped the cold sweat off his forehead with lingering fear and smiled bitterly to himself. It turned out that everything he did was under the watchful eyes of Zhenren Wen from the cave. However, it was obvious that Zhenren Wen did not intend to pursue the matter. Otherwise, he would have sent someone to arrest him. However, from the looks of it, not only did his actions not have any effect, it was extremely likely that Zhang Yan would make a wrong judgment. Thinking of this, his heart sank. Now, he could only hope that she would not fall into this trap. Qinsong School, Changguanzhan Yuan and Light Cave. Sun Zhenren was sitting on the couch, comprehending the mystery. Suddenly, his expression changed and he opened his eyes. He noticed that there was a movement in the spiritual opportunity outside. The situation was very similar to Zhenren Wen's method. With a thought, he immediately used his method to observe. After a while, he understood the cause. With a slightly disdainful expression, he said, "How dare you show off such tricks?" He immediately flicked his finger and a ray of spiritual light shot out into the sky. The disciples of the Blood Soul sect watched as the two streaks of light, one from the south and one from the north, rapidly approached each other. They could not help but feel nervous. However, it was at this moment that the water mirror in the sky seemed to have a boulder thrown into it. Ripples appeared, and the scenery immediately shattered. The Taoist stroked his beard and said, "Fellow Taoist Wen, someone is using a spell to disturb the spiritual opportunity." Wen Qingxiang smiled and said, "Just wait for me to calm it down." The Taoist nodded and said, "I will protect you." After that, the two of them took action. The former tried to calm the spiritual opportunity, while the latter used a spell to protect the surroundings, to prevent the person just now from disturbing again. Just as they were casting their spells, in other sects in the continent, there were suddenly a few deep mana surging, flying from different directions to help. The two of them unconsciously looked at each other and smiled. After a while, the spiritual light was ultimately outnumbered and was chased out. The water mirror gradually calmed down. But at this moment, a brilliant spiritual light flew down from the sky. It was extremely overbearing, and with a loud bang, it shattered the mirror light. At the same time, numerous powerful and unfathomable strands of magic energy rose up from the direction of the Lake of Dragon Lake. One of them was especially formidable, and it was like a great mountain that held up the sky as it resided in the sky, causing the energy that shot over from the outside world to be obstructed outside, and there was actually not a single strand of magic energy that was capable of breaking through. After a while, the people who cast the spell seemed to know that they could not find an opportunity, so they all stopped and turned back. The Taoist saw that no matter how hard he tried, he could not restore the spiritual opportunity to its original state, and could not help but be speechless. After a while, he said, "They have the advantage in numbers, what can we do?" When Qingxiang frowned slightly, and then regained his usual calm expression, he said, "This Zhang Yan actually has the Shaoqing and Qinsong sects working together to cover for him. It seems that there is no chance this time. Let go, when Qingping comes back, we will still know the details." The Taoist deeply agreed. With the two major sects of Xianmen taking action, it would not be good if they continued to be entangled. He thought for a while and said, "Zhang Yan is a person who only appears once in thousands of years in Xianmen. Now that the spiritual opportunity is confused, he might not have any scruples when he attacks, and Qingping may not be his opponent. Why don't we call him back?" When Qingxiang, however, firmly denied and said, "This matter, from top to bottom, was planned by Qingping himself. Now that we call him back, it is obviously telling the disciples that we think he is no match for Zhang Yan. How can we convince the others in the future? It is better to fight. Even if he loses, he will not lose his drive. The Taoist thought for a while and slowly nodded. Feng Qingping had a protective talisman with him. Even if he was no match for Yi Futian, he could still escape. By then, they would still know the details of the battle. At the same time, Zhang Yan was riding on the sword light, speeding towards the North Star sect. In fact, before he arrived, the North Star sect's request for help had not yet reached him. However, there were demonic cultivators from Yuan tribe hiding in the rivers and lakes of Donghua North Continent. The elder of the Devil sect did not hide his tracks when he flew over. Naturally, he was easily detected. After receiving the message, he quickly learned of the news and immediately flew over. At this moment, Shen Baishuang's voice suddenly sounded in his ears. Zhang Yan, we have already covered the spiritual opportunity within a 10,000-mile radius. No one can spy on this place. Later, you can attack as much as you want. Do not tarnish the reputation of our Qinsong school. Zhang Yan's traveling light only paused for a moment. Then he flew forward again. After flying for another 10 breaths, a blood-colored spiritual light rose up in front of him, shining tens of miles away. A Taoist in white holding a green jade flute stood on the blood-colored light. He looked down at him and said, "Taoist Zhang, I am Feng Qingping of the Blood Soul sect. I have been waiting here for a long time." Zhang Yan stopped the traveling light. He returned the greeting and then said with a faint smile, "Fellow Taoist, you are blocking me here. Do you think that without you can take down the North Star sect?" Feng Qingping had a look of certainty on his face as he said, "Taoist Zhang, how many disciples can your clear serenity heavenly lake mobilize, and how many people can you drive? This Feng has long since found out. Your esteemed sect's Peng Yuzhou has already gone to Linqing Monastery. Right now, even if your sect's disciples all come out, they won't be able to rush to help. This Feng has won this round." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Feng, the people I can drive might not necessarily be cultivators of my Qinsong." Feng Qingping blushed and said, "Why do you have to pretend to be calm? I know that you have subdued the Yuan tribe, but so what? No matter how many of them there are, it doesn't matter to me." As long as it wasn't a third-stage Yuanian cultivator, he was confident that the 6 Yuanian elders working together would be enough to deal with any situation. Zhang Yan said with a smile, "I'm afraid that fellow Taoist Feng has misunderstood. The person I'm talking about is also a cultivator of my profound sect. He went to the Star Stone during the sword duel between the 18 sections. Now, his cultivation has already improved and he has already entered the 3rd stage like you and me." Feng Qingping was stunned. He suddenly thought of someone and his expression changed slightly. He realized that he had missed this person previously. At this moment, he suddenly felt an unusual movement behind him. He quickly turned his head and saw a talisman shining with golden light descending from the sky a few hundred miles away. Then, a vast spiritual vigor descended and enveloped the entire Danyang mountain. He could not help but exclaim, "The heaven and earth seal?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "Sage Feng, if you retreat, I will not chase after you. I will only deal with a few of your fellow disciples." Feng Qingping heard this and his expression changed again. According to his original plan, he did not want to fight a life-and-death battle with Zhang Yan. His main goal was to delay, and if the situation was not good, he would retreat. However, it was different now. If his fellow disciples were in trouble and he abandoned them, even if he returned to the sect, he would be severely punished. In other words, he was already trapped here. Not only did he lose the advantage of advancing and retreating freely, he also had to think of ways to end the battle quickly. Even if he rushed over at this moment, it would be impossible for him to gain an advantage under the hands of 2/3 level nascent soul realm cultivators. It would be better to fight Zhang Yan with his life on the line before returning to assist them. Presently, he could only hope that these 6 elders would be able to hold on for a little longer. He gritted his teeth and tossed all distracting thoughts to the back of his mind. His gaze suddenly became incomparably stern as he said, "I was one step behind. Since I've fallen into fellow Taoist trap, it looks like we won't be able to leave if we don't settle this." Zhang Yan nodded and said, That's right. Feng Qingping let out a loud shout, and with a sway of his body, he suddenly vanished without a trace. Tens of thousands of blood souls split out, and they carried a bloody aura that filled the heavens and the earth as they howled and charged towards Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan stood still and there was a rumble under his feet. Boundless light of water rolled up and a vast wave of water surged for tens of miles. The sound of water splashing shook the heavens and earth. These blood souls seemed to know how powerful it was. When they reached in front of him, they did not dare to pounce forward and all circled to the sides. However, he raised his hand and balls of red flames rose from his back. The light was dazzling like the rising sun. Magnificent red clouds floated and wherever it passed, the blood souls would immediately turn into ashes. This was him using his Fa Li to control his divine art. He wanted to see who had the deepest Fa Li. In a battle, this could be said to be the most rude and unreasonable. Under normal circumstances, when the opponent saw that his Fa Li was not enough, he would definitely try to retreat. This would only waste his Fa Li for nothing and he might not even be able to hurt the opponent. However, at this moment, he had Feng Qingping's Achilles heel. He knew that not only could the opponent not leave, the opponent did not dare to let him go. He was already in a passive position. Therefore, he did not hold back and for the first time, he released all his Fa Li. In an instant, all the spiritual vigor within 100 miles was stirred by his mighty Fa Li. Chapter 8:12. Zhang Yan had fought with the cultivators of the Blood Soul sect a few times and was very familiar with their methods. From the techniques that he had, the Purple Cloud Heavenly Thunder was undoubtedly the best at restraining them. However, he did not use this technique right away because most of the disciples of the sect had the blood transformation escape technique. This technique was one of the 3 great escape techniques of the Devil sect. Normal Purple Cloud Heavenly Thunder might not be able to do anything against it. If he weaved a lightning net, the opponent could use this technique to escape first. Thus, he only used the 5 elements true light. At this moment, he used the fire true light to its fullest and gradually expanded outwards. However, after reaching a dozen miles, he stopped. It was not that he could not expand further, it was just that there was no need. The wider the range of the true light, the larger the circle of defense needed to be taken into account. The opponent had tens of thousands of blood souls. Although he had the water true light to defend, he was after all very fast and moved like lightning. At this moment, he had the light of fire revolving around him and the protection of the water light on the outside. He had already forced all the blood souls outside. However, he did not lock the door, but purposely left a weak spot somewhere. If this continued, the opponent's only chance of winning was to find a way to enter the inner circle. He had already prepared a killing move and was just waiting for them to enter. Over 5 kilometers away, Feng Qingping controlled the 10,000 blood souls to circle and flutter around Zhang Yan. He seemed to be suppressing the latter, yet he was actually extremely annoyed in his heart. Ordinary Dao techniques could only go 3 kilometers away, and it was already their limit. How could they be like Zhang Yan who could easily go a few tens of km away? Now that he was forced outside, he could not get close. No matter how powerful his magical power was, it was useless if he could not hit his opponent. Although there were many blood souls when they charged in, before they could reach Zhang Yan, they would be destroyed halfway. He knew that even if they fought like this for a few days, as long as his opponent's magical power was not used up, he would not be able to do anything. At this moment, there were only 3 ways. One was to avoid the main attack and use the method of guerrilla warfare. 2 was to break through the defense from the front and enter the palace. 3 was to find a gap and enter the inner circle to kill his opponent. The first method was the best. However, his fellow sect members were in danger. Their lives could be lost at any moment. There was no time to waste. He was not allowed to do so. As for the second method, Zhang Yan's magical power was dense and deep, surging for 100 miles. No one in his generation could compare to him. Face to face. It was undoubtedly courting death. Therefore, he could only use the last method. However, Feng Qingping also knew that this might be a trap set by Zhang Yan. It was waiting for him to enter. But the problem was that apart from this method, he had no other choice. Fine, as long as I'm careful, I might have a chance to win. After he calmed down, he took a deep breath and took out a treasured cauldron that was as small as a bowl from his sleeve. He held it in his hand and shook it downwards. In a split second, a bloody light filled the sky and thousands of blood-fiend-ean thunder shot out from the cauldron. When they reached the bottom, they exploded one after another and dispersed a large area of the water and fire lights. Seeing that a path had been opened up, he didn't dare to enter. Instead, he shook his body and drove a blood soul with a pair of intelligent eyes to mix with the thousands of ordinary blood souls. Then he rushed in along the path. This blood soul was known as true condensation. He had spent a lot of effort over hundreds of years and used countless spiritual medicines to refine 2 of them. Its profoundness was hard to come by. As long as he knew Tao techniques, the blood soul could use them all. Within a short moment, its magical power could be maintained to the same level as his real body. Letting this blood soul go was the same as him going out himself. That blood soul had the same face as him and could easily confuse his opponent. Even if the other party had any traps, he would be able to detect them. Then, the next time he went out personally, he would be able to be prepared. In reality, he had always released 2 blood souls at the same time when he faced his enemies. That was equivalent to 3 people attacking at the same time, and there were few who could match up to him. However, facing Zhang Yan, he had no confidence and could only use him as a chess piece to test the waters. Zhang Yan had abundant battle experience. When he saw Feng Qingping didn't come through the opening he'd set up and forcefully opened up another path, he knew that Feng Qingping had roughly guessed his intentions. So this attack was for the sake of probing and didn't have any intention of immediately deciding the outcome of the battle. This was within his expectations. So long as he wasn't forced into a corner at the last moment, then presumably Feng Qingping wouldn't be willing to take the risk himself. However, the initiative was in his hands now. So long as he destroyed Feng Qingping's methods one by one, then he would surely be able to force Feng Qingping to come to him. Thus, with a flick of his sleeve, a rumble resounded as thousands of violet lightning bolts shot out like a great waterfall. The thousands of blood souls that charged over were swept away by the lightning bolts and dispersed. Feng Qingping's true condensation blood soul carried a few magic treasures. Originally, he didn't want to expose them in advance, but when faced with such violent lightning that could topple mountains and overturn the seas, he could only retreat if he didn't use his methods. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to survive. However, how could he give up after entering the inner circle with great difficulty? He could only raise a jade stone in the air and spit out strands of mist that were like white silk. The mist was like brocade and cotton, and all the lightning bolts that came over were completely sucked into it. On the other hand, the blood soul didn't care about anything else and just charged towards the lightning tide with all its might. Although the jade stone could absorb lightning bolts, it wouldn't be able to endure it if it swallowed too much. So, it could only try its best to close the distance between it and Zhang Yan before it shattered. Not long after, the object shattered into powder with a kacha sound. However, at this moment, it had already rushed close. With a loud shout, a blood-colored brilliance flew out from the top of its head. Then, it condensed into 2 huge bloody hands, one on the left and one on the right. When Zhang Yan saw this, he gently raised his hand and several rays of earth element true light rose from his back. He crossed the void and collided with the bloody hands head-on. With 2 bangs, the bloody hands were smashed into pieces. The blood soul entered deep into the encirclement and could be killed by the true light from above and below at any time. In just a short moment, its magic power would fall to the bottom and become no different from a normal blood soul. So, it simply gave up on defense and pressed its abdomen, spitting out an arrow of blood. With a whoosh, it shot forward at an unparalleled speed. Under Zhang Yan's feet, a ray of earth element true light rose slowly and formed a wall, blocking in front of him. At the same time, the heaven and earth leaf flew above his head and hung down a golden curtain. The blood arrow was extremely sharp and actually penetrated through the layers of true light without any delay. In the end, with a clang, it hit the heaven and earth leaf and actually caused the golden light to shake violently and almost shatter. He couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. He seemed to have seen the cultivators of the Blood Soul sect use this method before, but it never had such power. If it wasn't for the earth element true light blocking it once, it might have broken the heaven and earth leaf. After using this method, the Blood Soul quickly deteriorated and its body also became indistinct, as if it had shot out all of its essence qi. Zhang Yan sensed its qi and saw that it was already at the end of its strength. It couldn't be compared to just now, so he casually shot out a few balls of lightning and completely scattered it. Feng Qingping frowned as he watched from the outside. He didn't expect to defeat the enemy in one go. This time, his original intention was to force out Zhang Yan's hidden tricks, but it was obvious that Zhang Yan hadn't used his true abilities yet. Left with no choice, he could only test it again. With a shake of his body, he released another true condensation realm Blood Soul. Just like before, he used the cauldron to release the baleful thunder, blasting open a path. Then he took out thousands of devil generals from the sky and formed a path with the former, driving them into the cave. This time, he managed to reach the inner circle smoothly. When he was near, the condensed true blood spirit smiled strangely. He brought the green jade flute in his hand to his mouth and blew a shrill sound. Wherever the sound of the flute passed, the spiritual vigor would be disrupted, the mana would collapse, and the true light would dissipate. Seeing that the front of Zhang Yan was wide open and there was no longer any obstruction, he couldn't help but reveal a happy expression. He knew that the opportunity had come. He shouted and thousands of blood souls immediately rushed forward, as if they wanted to drown everything in front of them in one go. When Zhang Yan heard the sound of the flute, he only felt that the breath in his body stagnated and the mana was not flowing smoothly. He frowned slightly. Looking at the blood souls that were rushing towards him, a dim light flashed across his eyes. There seemed to be red and purple flames flying up between his brows. He raised his head slightly and suddenly shouted towards the sky. Rumble! It was as if a storm swept across the sky. Thousands of blood souls were like paper. They were broken one after another and turned into pure spiritual qi that was carried away by the wind. Only the condensed true blood soul did not dissipate, but it also shook on the cloud. At this moment, two thin golden lines flew out of nowhere and flashed in the field. They crisscrossed and slashed at the condensed true blood soul, cutting it into 3 pieces. Seeing that another condensed true blood soul was broken, Feng Qingping was not surprised but happy. He thought to himself, seems like this is his hidden trick. It's really powerful. At the same time, he rejoiced in his heart. He could tell that even if his Dharmakaya had been there, he would have died on the spot after being struck by that golden light. Fortunately, he had tested it out first. For a disciple of a major sect like him, as long as he was prepared in advance, he would not have to be afraid of any Taoist techniques and supernatural powers. At this moment, his body suddenly trembled and he could not help but look towards the south. He could feel that the spiritual qi from the North Star faction behind him had gradually calmed down from the intense state just now. The situation of the battle should be stabilizing. He naturally did not think that he could defeat a 3rd-degree realm cultivator with just 6 people. It was obvious that his people could not hold on for much longer, and there was not much time left for him. He turned his head again and stared down. A touch of determination appeared on his face and he thought to himself, whether that is Zhang Yan's last trick or not, I have to give it a try. But if I want to win this person, I have to use that move. He had a supernatural power called Dust Passing Shadow. He could transfer his Dharmakaya to any blood soul in a breath's time. If he used it during a battle, he could get close to the enemy unknowingly and suddenly attack, making it impossible for the enemy to guard against it. However, this skill not only required the Dharmakaya of a Yuanying 3rd-degree realm cultivator to use it, but it also consumed a lot of mana. In a battle, Feng Qingping estimated that he could only use it 3 or 4 times before he was in danger of running out of mana. Ever since he learned this skill, he had always been prepared to use it during critical moments to escape. He did not want to use it at this moment, but the 2 blood souls did not make a breakthrough, and he had even thrown out many magical weapons. The remaining tricks he could use were getting lesser and lesser, forcing him to use this risky move. He took a deep breath and thought, if I fail this time and cause my fellow sect members to fall into the enemy's hands, I'm afraid I'll be severely punished when I return to the sect. But as long as I can force Zhang Yan to use all his tricks and bring the news back to the sect, I think I can make up for my mistakes. When he thought of this, he no longer hesitated and used all his mana. More and more blood souls gathered behind him, and not long after, they covered the entire sky. Chapter 8:13. Although Feng Qingping released over 10,000 blood spirits, he was not in a hurry to activate them. Instead, he turned into a blood light and wandered around. His expression became extremely serious. In his mind, he kept recalling the scene just now to ensure that he did not miss out on anything. Just now, I've seen 2 golden lights. I don't know what kind of divine ability it is, but I'll die if I get hit by it. I have to avoid it. Zhang Yan is skilled in the sword path. Especially since he was in Shaoqing for 30 years, he might have learned some amazing skills. Although I haven't seen him use it, I can't let my guard down. If that's the case, I'll need to use my divine abilities to avoid at least 3 of his killer moves before I can reach Zhang Yan. If there are any changes, I can use divine ability again after using all my magic power. However, I won't be able to resist anymore. I can only use the talisman given by the perfected one to escape. After thinking about it, he moved his Dharmakaya back a few miles away and took out a glass bottle from his sleeve. There was a drop of red jade-like blood marrow in the bottle. He glanced at it and said, I guess I'll have to use it eventually. This item was called the Blood Fat Jade Marrow. It was refined by a heavenly abode of the Blood Soul sect. Only Yuanying third-stage cultivators who had made great contributions to the sect could obtain it. The bottle in his hand was given to him by Bailey Qingyin when he came out. After swallowing it, one's magic power would increase by 30% within 10 breaths. Not only would it not damage one's vitality, it would also benefit the avatar greatly. If such an item was used together with the Blood Soul sect's methods, it would be able to turn the tides of a battle at a crucial moment. He originally wanted to keep it for when the demonic cave appeared in the future and the Xianling and Xianling families fought. However, he had no choice but to use it now. He lowered his head slightly and sucked at the mouth of the bottle. The drop of blood rolled into his mouth and was placed at the bottom of his tongue. He didn't swallow it. After making preparations, he raised the cauldron in his hand and was about to forcefully break the fire and water lights. However, just as he was about to move, he saw yellow smoke rising from the 2 lights below. It suddenly condensed into a huge hand. Rumble. Carrying the sound of wind and thunder, it grabbed towards the place where he was. Mysterious yellow dragon capturing palm? Feng Qingping was shocked. This cauldron required him to stand still in order to be used. Therefore, he could only ride on a streak of light. Dodge in another direction. But every time he stopped and was about to make a move, that big hand would definitely sweep over, forcing him to dodge again. After a few tries, he had already figured it out. Zhang Yan should have already sensed the method of this magic treasure, so he didn't give her the opportunity to make a move. Even though it was slightly troublesome, Feng Qingping felt that he had a way to deal with it. A wisp of a fierce expression flashed in his eyes as he raised his hand and drew a talisman before lightly tapping the cauldron. As soon as it touched the cauldron, an imperceptible wail immediately came from it. However, he acted as if he didn't hear anything. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the item away. When it entered the water, fire, light, and energy, the treasure seemed to be unable to bear the burden. Many fine cracks appeared on its body, and with a few cracking sounds, it exploded. The room was originally filled with a myriad of bolts of baleful blood-in lightning. At this moment, they were instantly unrestrained and abruptly poured out. In just a short moment, an area of a few tens of kilometers was filled with raging baleful blood-in qi, and the sky was illuminated into a dark red color. Such turbid energy could pollute spiritual energy. It wasn't much of a problem for the cultivators of the Blood Soul sect, but for the cultivators of the Shen sect, it was something they were afraid of. Feng Qingping smiled coldly. He had intentionally created a perfect opportunity to attack by destroying his Dharma treasure. Now that the path ahead was open, he waved his hand downwards, and the tens of thousands of blood souls that were originally patrolling outside dove down from all directions. Only a few of them did not advance but retreated instead, going far to the back, arriving at a mountain top, hiding there with its back to the sun. This was the path of retreat that he left behind. If he was trapped by some magical treasure, he could use the dust passing shadow technique to come here. After he finished setting everything up, he activated his escape technique and charged downwards like a bloody rainbow. With the baleful blood and Yin lightning opening a path, there were no more obstacles in front of him. After successfully advancing several miles, he heard the sound of tides around him. In an instant, thousands of blood spirits disappeared. The blood and filthy energy in the sky was being swept away by the flames. He knew that the fire and water energies had surrounded him again, but he didn't care about it. He just rushed towards where Zhang Yan was. However, because of this, he stood out among the tens of thousands of blood spirits and lost his ability to hide. This wasn't a mistake, but he did it on purpose. Just now, he had already tested it out. Although Zhang Yan's magic power was high, he was still very careful. He definitely wouldn't let a blood spirit get in front of him. Since that was the case, why not create a commotion and attract his attention so that he wouldn't have time to care about the blood spirits elsewhere? At this moment, within the formation, Zhang Yan had already swept his gaze over. He looked at the blood light that was charging over with an unprecedented momentum. With a thought, a thin golden light flew out from behind him and slashed down. Feng Qingping's eyes narrowed, and he immediately activated the dust flash technique. His figure suddenly vanished on the spot, and in the next moment he'd already transformed his body into the body of a nearby blood soul beast, and he continued flying upwards. He hadn't gone far when another golden light attacked him. He used the same trick again and used this divine ability to avoid it. At this moment, Feng Qingping was less than 300 meters away from Zhang Yan. With his speed, charging into the inner circle was only a matter of a breath's time. Just as he was about to charge in one go, sword chi suddenly surged in front of him, and his eyes were filled with dazzling sword lights. In the blink of an eye, the scenery in front of him suddenly disappeared. He glanced over and noticed that he had been trapped within a restrictive formation. He revealed a sneer that said, as expected, and thought to himself, I didn't expect this Zhang Yan to have actually mastered the sword formation technique. Fortunately, I managed to test it out today. Otherwise, if I fight him in the future and don't take any precautions, I'll definitely suffer a great loss. He thought again and thought to himself, even though I've tested out many of Zhang Yan's techniques, I probably haven't forced him to use his true killer move. However, I still have techniques that I haven't used. If I go all out, I might still have a chance to defeat this person. Originally, if it wasn't for the fact that his fellow sect members had fallen into the enemy's hands, he could have chosen to retreat at this point if it wasn't for the fact that he wanted to determine life and death. After all, everyone only had one life-saving talisman. Once he used it, there would be no more. However, it was different now. If he left just like that and the sect found out that he hadn't used his full strength, no one would be able to protect him if they pursued the matter. Thus, he could only continue. He turned his body and made his body vanish from the sword formation. He had already quietly transformed into a blood spirit nearby. When he was in the outside world, he didn't hesitate at all. He swallowed the lipid chalcedony at the bottom of his tongue and felt that his entire body was filled with supernatural power. He was almost unable to suppress it, so he hammered his chest and shouted loudly. He condensed most of his power into a soul-stealing blood arrow and shot it forward with unparalleled speed. With a flick of his sleeve, he tossed out 200 black lightning beads. This was his true trump card. This thunder bead was called the Yuangang Thunder Bead. It was refined by the Blood Soul sect to deal with the future battles in the Devil's Cave. There were only a few thousand of them in one cauldron. They were divided among him and a few other sect members with similar cultivation. Usually, 7 or 8 of them could kill a Yuanning cultivator. However, he threw out all of them at this moment. At the same time, he stretched his hand downwards and instantly used the heaven and earth lock technique. In his opinion, even if Zhang Yan was also a Yuanning third-grade cultivator and could easily break this technique, he only needed to trap him for a moment and delay until the thunder bead finished its work. Even if he couldn't kill him, he could at least injure him heavily. Zhang Yan was still calm and composed when he faced the continuous attacks. He didn't even dodge. A jade book suddenly flew out from the top of his head and suddenly opened. In an instant, the heaven and earth were seized by a majestic aura. A dazzling spiritual light shot up into the sky. Wherever the light shone, whether it was the thunder bead or the blood spirit, everything was frozen in midair. Feng Qingping was still hoping to succeed in one move. When he saw this scene, he couldn't help but turn pale with fright. He wanted to use his divine ability to escape, but he found out that the magic power in his body was like a pool of stagnant water. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't move it at all. Zhang Yan looked at him and said calmly, "Fellow cultivator, don't waste your energy struggling. This item is called the Qiyuan Constitution Map. It is a treasure left behind by an ascended spiritual master in the Dongsheng continent. I just happened to get my hands on it. Unless you have already achieved the Grotto Heaven realm, don't even think about escaping." He knew that a third-grade cultivator like Feng Qingping most likely had an escape treasure. If he didn't use extraordinary methods, he wouldn't be able to stop this person. However, this map could only be used within 300 feet. Previously, he intentionally let him in so that he could wait here. Although it was a pity that he lost a talisman, it was worth it to be able to kill a third-grade cultivator. Moreover, Qinsong School couldn't be compared to Zhongtai sect. If he needed this kind of treasure, he could just ask the sect when the Devil's Cave appeared. He calmly raised his hand and a sword light flew over. After making a circle in the air, it slashed downwards. Feng Qingping was shocked and terrified. Because he was frozen by the map, he couldn't even speak. He could only watch as the sword light flew over and slashed diagonally across his neck. With a swish, where the sword light passed, a head flew up. Then, countless rays of light gathered together and flew in all directions. In just a moment, his body and spirit were minced into pieces. A clear and melodious sound was heard. A crystal-clear jade slip flew into the field. With a slight tremble, it slowly absorbed the essence in the surroundings. Zhang Yan stood with his hands behind his back, expressionless as he watched the scene unfold before him. After a long while, he heard the jade slip emit a soft cry, as if it was cheering. It reluctantly circled around a few times before turning into a bright stream of light and returning to the aperture between his eyebrows. Feeling the essence return, he circulated the mysterious skill dozens of times. Just now, he had completely digested it. After a silent inspection, he felt that the body-penetrating contract was stronger than before. It wasn't far from the 4th grade. After dealing with Feng Qingping, he looked at the sky and waved his sleeve. With a rumble, the water light expanded and swept up, absorbing the thousands of blood souls into it. He returned the sky clear. Then he retracted his divine ability, stepped on the astral wind, and headed in the direction of the North Star sect. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.